Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. Marvel. Start with summoning the Shadow Troopers. Chapter 81. Time is fair, whether you are rich or poor, it gives everyone 24 hours a day. When the sun rose the next day, two aerial photography helicopters took off directly from the top floor of the TV station and began to debug various equipment, making final preparations for the next live broadcast of the battle. At the same time, Richard, who had not slept all night, also came to the studio. Looking at the busy people in the studio, a look of anticipation appeared in his eyes. As long as the plan goes well, today will be a day to remember from now on. At the same time, Peter and Dr. Octopus in New York City finally started to set off. Peter was dressed in a black spider suit and wrapped his body. Now he looks more evil, and his strength is much stronger than before. As for Dr. Octopus, he wears a pair of black windproof sunglasses on his face and a black cape on his body. He is equally handsome. It can be seen that after the two left the TV station yesterday, Richard did not know whether other preparations were done or not, but he definitely put a lot of effort into dressing up. When Dr. Octopus and Peter came to a building according to the information Richard sent them, Victor in the building was a little restless and confused. There is an idiom that is well said, called chaos. Originally Victor's heart would not be like this. But as long as he thinks of the importance of this matter to him, all of his shrewdness will be forgotten by him. Just when he gradually became impatient because of waiting. Suddenly, words with a sense of ridicule sounded by the window. "Hey man, are you waiting for me?" Hearing this, Victor suddenly turned his head to look at the window, and saw Peter squatting on the window at a glance. Immediately, Victor's eyes widened, and his eyes were full of wonder. Spider-Man, the name that used to be popular in the Federation, Victor naturally couldn't have heard of it, and he even specialized in Spider-Man. I just wanted to try it out and see if I could replicate his abilities. But it turned out that the birth of Spider-Man was just an accident. Among the hundreds of experiments he had done, all of them ended in failure, but it was precisely because of this that Victor's familiarity with Spider-Man was far more comparable. So even if Peter is now wearing a black spider suit, but just listening to his voice, Victor is sure that he is the original Spider-Man. And it was precisely because he recognized Spider-Man's identity that Victor was so surprised. Could it be that Spider-Man is also the Lord of the Lord? The thoughts in his mind kept churning, and before he could come up with a reason, the figure of Dr. Octopus appeared at the door. Four mechanical tentacles stretched out behind him, holding him up in the air, and with his handsome equipment, he looked extremely domineering. "It's almost time, it's time to go, and when the mission is over, I don't object to the two of you chatting in private." As Dr. Octopus spoke, Victor, who was still shocked by the arrival of Spider-Man, suddenly came back to his senses. Seeing the mighty and domineering Dr. Octopus, Victor's eyelids twitched wildly, and a look of joy rose up on his face at the same time. Victor can't think of anyone who can appear here, except for the helper Richard promised him. They thought that Richard was so powerful, not only sent him a former Spider-Man, but also sent him a Dr. Octopus who was extremely powerful at first glance. For a time, all the negative emotions in Victor's heart were swept away, replaced by pride and self-confidence. With the help of these two, Victor believes that it will be a lot easier for him to capture the mysterious power of the Fantastic Four. Victor nodded solemnly at the moment, and quickly replied, "Thank you for your help, I'm ready, let's go." After speaking, Victor brought his own energy absorber and walked out in the first place. Seeing this, Peter and Dr. Octopus quickly followed. Both of them had a very thorough understanding of the mission this time, mainly to cooperate with Victor. As for what Victor wanted to do, this was not something they should consider. Just as the three of them walked out of the building, a helicopter was hovering in midair above the clouds, and a photographer captured the three people's silhouettes perfectly through a high-definition camera. For a while, this picture was transmitted back to the studio and passed to Richard's eyes. Watching this scene, two bright rays of light flashed in Richard's eyes, and he immediately said, "Just use this scene as the beginning, and prepare to integrate the battle into this video." With Richard's order, naturally no one would come out to object, and for a while, the content of the studio screen began to quickly connect to the TVs in New York City. Not only that, but even the big screens on the street were occupied by the figures of the three victors at this moment. For a while, everyone who saw this scene couldn't help but wonder, who is this? What do they want to do? Soon Peter's figure appeared in front of everyone, which immediately caused an uproar among countless people. The program that had just started quickly became popular with Peter's appearance. As a former superhero, even if Peter disappeared for a while, his popularity and topicality still did not completely dissipate. Therefore, when he reappeared in the public eye, and also changed into a completely different dress from the past, it instantly attracted countless attention and provided a great help for Richard's plan, which was unexpected. Happiness. For a time, the number of people watching the live broadcast increased wildly at a speed visible to the naked eye. Countless people tuned to the new City TV channel and watched the content broadcasted in it quietly. And for all this, the three of Victor were naturally unaware. At this time, Peter and Dr. Octopus were heading towards the Rambo building together under the leadership of Victor. In order to show their abilities and perform more perfectly, neither Peter nor Dr. Octopus chose to ride in a vehicle. Peter relied on spider silks to constantly shuttle among high-rise buildings. And Dr. Octopus relied on 4 mechanical tentacles to walk on the ground, and the ground thumped for a while, making him look like a human-shaped tank, and the countless people in front of the TV were amazed. I don't know how many people were disturbed along the way. I only know that the place where Dr. Octopus passed, which was originally a bustling street, was instantly emptied. Everyone looked at Dr. Octopus with 4 mechanical tentacles, and they were scared and fled. Even if 1 or 2 were daring to hide on the edge, their eyes were still full of awe. As for Victor, his performance was much more normal. After leaving the building, he drove directly to the Rambo building. Perhaps due to anxiety, the vehicle's speed in the urban area reached more than 100 kilometers per hour, which can be calculated as seriously speeding. For ordinary people to drive at such a fast speed in the urban area, it is completely tantamount to suicide. After all, the congested traffic in the urban area simply cannot bear such a strong speed. But all this is not a problem for Victor. After the mutation, Victor's neural response has long been far superior to ordinary people. Although the current speed is fast, it is still not out of his control. In this way, the three of them showed their shocking strength through different ways of appearing, instantly attracting the attention of countless people, and officially warming up for today's live broadcast of the battle. Rise up. Outside the Rambo building, with the advent of 3 figures, there was a moment of panic. Pedestrians fled, screaming in the streets. Victor turned a blind eye to this chaotic scene. Victor turned to look at Peter and Dr. Octopus, nodded at them, and then walked into the Rambo building. As for Dr. Octopus and Peter, they jumped up and quickly climbed towards the top floor above the outer walls of the Rambo building. At the same time, on the top floor of the Rambo building, the 4 of Reed were also alarmed by the sudden screams outside the window. Suddenly, their expressions changed and their faces became serious. Susan even walked quickly to the window and looked down. Suddenly Susan's expression froze, and Johnny's puzzled voice sounded behind him. What happened? While speaking, Johnny wanted to step forward to check. At this moment, a black figure jumped up and instantly landed on the wall on the edge of the balcony. The figure that suddenly appeared startled a few people, and they couldn't help but take a step back for a while. Peter looked at the people who were a little dazed. The corners of his mouth under the mask were slightly raised, and at the same time, he locked his eyes on Susan and said with a teasing, "Good morning, ma'am, do you want a vigorous exercise?" Peter's voice just fell, and before Reed and the others could speak, there was a sudden loud bang behind them. The next second, 4 mechanical tentacles suddenly broke through the wall, and with a loud noise, Dr. Octopus appeared in front of them. Seeing the sudden appearance of Peter and Dr. Octopus, the faces of the 4 of Reed became extremely ugly, and Grim subconsciously cursed, "This kind of joke is not funny." At this moment, Johnny's eyes were fixed on Peter, and he suddenly said loudly, "You are Spider-Man, right? Why did you become like this? Are you not a superhero?" Listening to this series of questions, Peter spread his hands and said with a crooked head, "No, remember from today, I am the Dark Spider, no longer Spider-Man." As the words fell, a tense atmosphere suddenly permeated the entire scene, and the Magic 4 also realized that the 2 people in front of them were not good. At the moment, the 4 figures slowly leaned back against each other, watching Dr. Octopus and Peter vigilantly. Just when the atmosphere at the scene was dignified, the sound of the arrival of the elevator attracted the attention of several people. As the elevator door slowly opened, Victor stepped out of it. Glancing at the situation on the entire battlefield, a confident smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. "Hi Reed, long time no see." Seeing the appearance of Victor, Reed's face suddenly became puzzled. "Why?" Hearing this, a slight smile appeared on the corner of Victor's mouth. "I need the power in your body. Haven't you been disgusted with this power all the time? Why don't you give it to me and let me help you change back to your original appearance?" Quote. Hearing this, Reed didn't hesitate, shook his head decisively and refused. Maybe they had the idea of becoming ordinary people at first, but as time passed, they had become accustomed to their own power, and they didn't want to be ordinary people anymore. As for this result, Victor had already expected it, so there was no particularly disappointed expression on his face, just a trace of regret. "If this is the case, then I can only say sorry, let's do it." Without any sloppiness, Victor was very decisive. Dr. Octopus, who was already ready, suddenly launched an offensive at this moment. Two mechanical tentacles, with unparalleled power, quickly attacked the magical foursome. Peter on the other side also raised his hand instantly, and a spider silk shot out directly from his wrist. And Victor, who ordered to do it, showed his strength without hiding it. Thunder jumped between his palms, instantly turning into a dazzling electric light, slamming into the magical foursome. The attack speed of the three had to be said to have reached the extreme. Almost at the same time, the three attacks had come to the magic four, so they had no time to dodge. For a while, a trace of panic appeared on the faces of several people. But at this moment, a protective cover with a hint of light blue instantly enveloped the four of them, helping them in their first wave of attacks. Boom, boom, bang. A series of explosions sounded, and Susan's face instantly turned pale among the magical four. Blood flowed from her nose, and her face also showed a burst of pain. Susan's ability is to be invisible and to control the force field. The force field can isolate all elements and is the best means of defense. And the light blue shield that shrouded everyone's heads was naturally Susan's handwriting. However, although the defense of the force field is strong, there is an upper limit to the impact Susan can withstand. Therefore, after resisting a wave of strong attacks from Victor and the three of them, the light blue shield that originally shrouded the heads of everyone, it also suddenly became invisible. Reed, who was standing beside Susan, looked at her, and a look of anger suddenly rose on his face. Fortunately, he was not dazzled by the anger, so even though his heart was already full of anger, he still calmly ordered, "Escape. Get out of here first, don't entangle with them." As soon as Reed finished speaking, Grim and Johnny rushed out. Johnny rushed towards Victor with red flames all over his body, and the temperature in the room rose sharply in an instant, making everyone feel like they were in a furnace. And Grim, with his strong and solid body, rushed directly to Dr. Octopus. Dr. Octopus waved two mechanical tentacles and slammed on Grim's body continuously. The terrifying force smashed Grim with a bang, but it couldn't hurt him in the slightest. Glancing at the two of them, Reed, who stayed where he was, supported Susan, turned and rushed towards Peter. Right now, there was still 10 meters between Reed and Peter, but Reed punched out. Immediately, his arms continued to extend, and he came to Peter in an instant. Looking at this scene, Peter let out an exclamation, and his body suddenly jumped to avoid the blow. At this moment, Susan finally recovered from the sequelae just now, and now her figure disappeared, and instantly disappeared in the original place, land. Peter, who had just escaped Reed's attack, didn't wait for him to start to fight back. As soon as the strong wind hit him, it immediately disrupted his offensive. He had no choice but to turn around and fight back, but his fist fell directly into the air. There was nothing behind him at all. Seeing this, Peter couldn't help complaining, "It's not fair." The battle scene of the Rambo building was broadcast live by 2 aerial photography helicopters and delivered to thousands of households. For a time, the people of the entire Star-Striped Federation were completely boiling. Everyone looked at the fierce battle scene in the picture, their faces were full of incredible expressions, and the worldview was severely impacted. Although the news about the superhuman has been widely circulated on the major networks, most people are skeptical because few people have seen it with their own eyes. After all, the online world is full of strange things, and there are all kinds of information, so although extraordinary people have always existed in this world, ordinary people don't know much about them. And now, Richard has opened the door of the extraordinary for them, so that they can witness what extraordinary is called, and the people suddenly wake up. It turns out that in the world they live in, there are still such a group of powerful destructive guys. More and more people are paying attention to this matter for a while, and the Stars and Stripes Federation is completely messed up because of this live broadcast. In a certain palace, the ruler of the Star-Striped Federation quickly summoned the heads of various forces to discuss how to deal with this matter. At the same time, the military has also received orders at this moment to mobilize troops to enter the city and block the fighting area of Peter and others. If necessary, weapons of mass destruction can be used to arrest or kill. On the contrary, it is the TV station, and no one is paying attention at this moment. As soon as the storm has started, if the live broadcast is stopped at this moment, the Stars and Stripes federal government will definitely be overwhelmed by the anger of the people. After all, this is a country that pays attention to freedom and democracy, which is also the foundation of the Stars and Stripes Federation. So whoever stops the live broadcast at this moment will face the anger of hundreds of millions of people. This is something that the Star-Striped Federation is unwilling to bear, and it is also something they cannot bear, so this live broadcast can continue. At this moment, the battle on the battlefield has entered a white-hot stage. Dr. Octopus and others turned on their fire, and the top floor of the Rambo building was battered. The thing is like a reef. No matter how violent the attack of Dr. Octopus is, it is difficult to shake his sturdy body. Therefore, the battle has been going on until now. Except for the broken clothes, the stone man has not even a slight wound on his body. On the contrary, it is all the surrounding buildings. Because the battle between the two has suffered great damage, even the roof has been destroyed. There were big holes pierced through. In the same way, although Dr. Octopus can't help the thing's reaction speed is obviously not as flexible as that of the mechanical tentacles, so he is passively beaten from beginning to end, and has no ability to fight back. In addition to this battlefield, the battle between Victor and Johnny is also in full swing. The flames and thunder and lightning controlled by both sides can be called one of the most lethal forces. The flame and the electric light constantly collide in midair, causing bursts of explosions in an instant. But as the battle continued, Johnny gradually fell into the disadvantage. Facing Victor's attack, it became more and more difficult to resist. It's not that his attack power is inferior to that of Victor, but his defensive power is completely incomparable to Victor. The metallized Victor has a strong resistance to high temperature, but Johnny, who only has the power of flame, has no other way to face Victor's lightning attack except to offset it with flame. Therefore, every time there is a collision, there will always be a small part of the power of thunder and lightning acting on him, making him numb and his hair standing up one by one. In the Dark Alliance trio, both Dr. Octopus and Victor had the upper hand in the battle, and in the end, only Peter was left, which seemed extremely uncomfortable at the moment. The invisible Susan is like a poisonous snake hiding in the dark. Although the attack power is not comparable to that of Johnny and Grim, it is no less difficult to deal with. Add in a Mr. Reed with a rubber body, and Peter's life gets even harder. His attack was either blocked by the defensive force field that Susan had blessed on Reed, or Reed absorbed all the power by virtue of his own characteristics. So that his attack could not cause effective damage at all, but could only barely support under the attack of the two, which was extremely embarrassing. But such an anxious state of battle did not last for too long. With a cry of pain, Johnny's chest was completely hit by Victor's lightning. The terrifying thunder light directly blasted him out on the spot, and the original burning flame on his body was completely extinguished, replaced by a charred body. With Johnny's defeat, Victor was able to get out of the way. Looking at Peter, who was gradually falling behind, Victor's figure quickly joined the fray. Although Susan's invisibility is invisible, the sound of the wind brought by her actions allows people to clearly capture her position. Because of Reed, Peter was unable to solve her for a long time, but when Victor joined the battlefield, things changed instantly. I saw that after Victor joined the battlefield, he didn't use thunder and lightning, and punched Reed directly. The fist brought a strong wind, causing a whistling sound in the air. Reed, who could barely gain the upper hand because of Susan's help, had no power to dodge this punch at all, which made Susan, who was invisible, anxious, and couldn't help but attack Victor, in an attempt to share the pressure on Reed. And at the moment of his action, a cold smile appeared on Victor's face. his head suddenly turned in her direction, and he said in a cold voice, "Diaresis, I found you, Susan." As the voice sounded, Victor's offensive suddenly changed, and his fist turned sharply in Susan's direction. Boom! Accompanied by the sound of a fist hitting the body, the next second, Susan's figure in the air suddenly appeared, and Victor punched it out. Immediately God King Nuo's odd group of four folded one more person. Without Susan's interruption, Peter finally started to break out at this moment, and the grievances in his heart were turned into motivation at this moment. Above his wrist, a cobweb suddenly sprayed out, instantly covering the surface of Reed's body. Without Susan's force field defense, in the face of the cobweb's attack, Reed could not dodge at all, and suddenly Reed was hit by the cobweb instantly, and the whole person was wrapped tightly. As the spider web restrained Reed's movements, Peter's fist also fell on Reed's body like raindrops at this moment. The sound of tearing to the flesh continued to sound, and Reed couldn't help but let out a groan, and was finally knocked out by Peter. With the three of Reed out one after another, in the end, only Graham was left to support, and with Victor and Peter freeing up, Graham's defeat was almost doomed. In front of the TV, the people of the Star-Striped Federation watched this scene, and everyone clenched their fists subconsciously, their faces faintly pale. In their opinion, the Fantastic Four, representing justice, lost to the Dark Alliance, representing darkness, which also meant the fall of light and the twilight of the world. For a while, many people cheered for the Fantastic Four in front of the TV, as if this would make the Fantastic Four even stronger. But it turns out that thoughts sometimes don't change the facts of things, at least at this moment they can't change anything. Under the siege of Victor, Peter and Dr. Octopus, Grimm was finally defeated. His sturdy body was cracked inch by inch, and his body was as strong as a rock, as if it had undergone the baptism of years. It was covered with all kinds of scars and cracks, which made countless people feel hopeless. In S.H.I.E.L.D., Fury was also watching the TV screen at the moment. Not only him, but all the core members of S.H.I.E.L.D. were watching this scene with their own eyes at the moment. But unfortunately, they were unable to change this fact. Fury, who had always been calm for a while, couldn't help but swear, "Fake shit." At the same time, a thought that would only bloom in the future quietly emerged in his mind at this moment. He wants to form an extraordinary team, a powerful enough team of extraordinary people. As soon as this idea was born in his mind, it quickly took root in his heart. At the same time, in the TV studio, watching everything progress as he expected, Richard's mouth suddenly burst into a deep laughter. At this time, under his wave, the camera cut from the battlefield to the studio, and Richard's figure appeared in front of the people of the entire Stars and Stripes Federation. At the same time, the low and evil laughter also spread to the ears of everyone in the Stars and Stripes Federation, attracting everyone's attention. When they saw Richard with a tiger-shaped mask covering his face, everyone was shocked. The tiger-shaped mask on Richard's face was condensed with the power of the Shadow Core and was born in the darkness. Therefore, although the appearance of the tiger-shaped CGDA mask is not terrifying, all those who look at this mask feel as if they are being stared at by the darkness, and their hearts can't help bursting with hair. At this time, Richard's laughter slowly stopped on the TV, and the hoarse voice spread throughout the Stars and Stripes Federation through the TV. "You can call me the Lord, I am the Master of Darkness, and darkness is the destination of all people. I look forward to all those who have a heart for darkness to join me, and let those who claim to be righteous and bright, look at the power of darkness. I'm here, looking forward to your arrival." The words full of delusions sounded slowly, and the people in the Star-Stripe Federation became quiet at this moment. Everyone seemed to see a demon king rising, and their hearts were filled with panic for a while. At this moment, the picture on the TV was suddenly cut off, and the screen turned into a snowflake, and everyone suddenly came back to their senses. At the same time, in the studio, Harry, who was standing beside him with a look of apprehension, looked at the signal that was suddenly cut off. He couldn't help but panic, and quickly explained, "It's none of my business, I didn't cut off the signal came from the outside. Cut off." Looking at the anxious Harry, Richard nodded without saying a word. For this scene, he had already anticipated that the Star-Striped Federation could not allow him to promote the darkness, and it was only a matter of time before the signal was cut off. But all his goals have been achieved, the signal is cut off, and it is time for him to retreat. Just when Richard was about to leave, a cold voice suddenly sounded at this moment. Dangerous, dangerous, dangerous. Mission. Survive. Explanation. There is a strong man who has come from a long time and detected strong hostility to you, and survived from his hands. Reward. One designated lottery draw. Seeing the information that was beating wildly in his mind, Richard's footsteps suddenly stopped, and his body froze in place. This was the first time he felt a sense of urgency from the mission issued by the system. In particular, the three blood-red dangerous characters that appeared at the top of the task panel seemed to indicate something, which instantly made Richard's heart feel uneasy. His thoughts were turning faster. Think about who it is, who wants to kill yourself across the long river of time. But soon Richard gave up thinking, and with his limited understanding of Marvel, he couldn't think of anyone who would go so far to kill himself. At this moment, in the Rambo building, Victor is using the energy absorber he made to absorb the power brought by the cosmic storm from the magical foursome and convert them to himself. The first target he chose was Greem, who had just fallen. With a dim light, Greem, whose body was as hard as a rock, gradually began to return to normal. Peter and Dr. Octopus watched this scene quietly, and a trace of fear flashed in their eyes. And Susan, who fell to the ground, looked at Graham, who was gradually returning to normal, and suddenly screamed with sadness. No, no, stop it. At this moment, Grimm still has the wounds left from the battle just now. When he has the ability, although such injuries are serious, they are not fatal. But as the mysterious power in his body was extracted, the whole person gradually returned to normal. Such a serious injury is simply not something normal people can bear. So losing power means losing life. So it's no surprise that Susan reacts like this. But no matter how she shouted, Victor's hands didn't stop moving at all. When the dim light that permeated Grimm's body disappeared, Grimm's head swayed, completely losing his breath of life. Instead, there was a stronger aura on Victor. Feeling the power surging in his body, Victor suddenly smiled. His smile seemed extremely arrogant. Susan closed her eyes sadly. Sobering up from the invigorating feeling, Victor's icy eyes fell on Johnny again, and he walked towards Johnny with his footsteps. Susan watched this scene, her breathing almost stopped, and her head was shaking like a rattle. If Grimm's death made her sad, then Johnny's death made her completely unacceptable, because this is his brother. For a time, Susan's heart couldn't help but make a prayer. Help me, who can help me? The long river of time has existed since ancient times. It records the various states of the world, engraves all things in the world, witnesses the origin and destruction of planets, and also witnesses the rise and fall of the universe and the birth. Time is long, untouchable, unseeable, unperceivable, but it truly exists in the universe. However, as the so-called universe is huge, there are all kinds of wonders. Life is one of the greatest miracles in the world, and with the birth of life, among many lives, miracles other than miracles will appear. Franklin Richards, such a miracle. He was born an Omega-level mutant with the ability to time travel, manipulate time, causal rates, and first-level reality and create the universe. It can be said that when he was born, he was already at the top of the pyramid. On this day, Franklin suddenly felt heartache and couldn't breathe for some reason. Something related to him was happening. And he was horrified to discover that his existence was being slowly erased, not physically, but from the root, as if he had never been born in this world. Immediately, Franklin's face turned solemn, his hands waved in midair, and soon a dense line of cause and effect appeared in front of him. Ignoring most of the causal lines, Franklin searched for the causal line of the source of his birth, and soon found the reason for his heart palpitations. My own existence is being erased from my mother's generation, which means that my past mother is in mortal danger. Once his mother who existed in the past dies, then it is naturally impossible for him to appear in this world. Thinking of this, Franklin was startled, and then an uncontrollable anger suddenly rose from his heart, and his figure quickly faded in place, stepping on the river of time, against the river of time. Soon a wave appeared in front of him, and this wave was the timeline when his mother was in danger, and Franklin stepped into it without saying a word. Victor, who was walking towards Johnny, suddenly stopped at this moment, suddenly looked up at the void above his head, his face quickly became dignified, as if he was sensing something. At the same time, the originally bright sky dimmed instantly, and black clouds rolled in, completely covering the sky. A bolt of lightning pierced the dark cloud, and the terrifying sound of thunder continued to explode within the dark cloud, like the sky was angry. A touch of incomparably depressing breath, at this moment, also fell from the sky, making everyone feel a palpitations. Especially Victor and the others felt a great terror for the first time, as if something was about to happen. At this moment, the sky trembled, and the sound of thunder that was constantly blasting suddenly stopped, and a huge crack appeared directly on the sky. The entire sky was split in two at this moment. Such a terrifying scene not only appeared in the sky above New York City, but also appeared in the entire Star Stripe Federation, and all the people were completely boiled for a while. The doomsday theory spread among the crowd, and panic also grew. Everyone felt the fear that came from their hearts. For a time, the crime rate in the Xinjiao Federation instantly soared. I don't know how much. Feeling that the end has come to them, they have completely lost the shackles of the past, burning, killing and looting, which started directly on the streets. For a time, on the continents of the Star Stripe Federation, the Alliance dispatched all police forces to suppress this sudden turmoil. On the contrary, it was New York City, a crime-prone place in the past, but there was no riot in the face of this situation. First, because the army is stationed in the city at the moment, and second, because they all know that the real devil is in New York City, so everyone is too scared to go out, even if they are also afraid of the changes in the sky, but because of this, they cherished their own lives more, so there was no turmoil. At the same time, on the TV station, Richard looked up at the sky where a large crack had opened, and the dignified color in his eyes became more and more intense. The sense of crisis in my heart is like a volcanic eruption, reaching its peak in an instant. Looking at the crack in the sky, Ricard has seen the crack, and a looming figure is trying to come over, but it seems to be blocked by something, so he has not crossed the crack for a long time. Seeing this, a ruthless color flashed in Richard's eyes, and Richard's figure rose to the sky, and in the blink of an eye, he was above the sky. The person behind the crack is almost certainly the enemy. Although I don't know what it is blocked by, and it has been unable to cross the crack for a long time, in any case, Richard can't watch him come over. The moment the power of the dragon talisman burned on his body, this was the first time Richard used his full force to urge the dragon talisman without reservation, and the terrifying flame burned on Richard's body for the first time. Katakana middle dot 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 katakana middle dot, and it quickly spread towards the sky. In less than a blink of an eye, the sky that was originally covered with dark clouds was instantly shrouded in a sea of fire. The atmosphere that was originally depressing because of the appearance of the dark clouds was swept away with the emergence of flames at this moment. Richard controlled this sea of flames with all his strength. Under his control, the flames gradually condensed, and a 1,000-mile-long fire dragon gradually formed and revealed to the world. Everyone on the ground looked at this scene and was instantly stunned by this scene. Even the crack in the sky was temporarily left behind by them, and only this one was left in their eyes. The fire dragon. This fire dragon is an image of a flower dragon, not a large lizard in the West. It looks sacred, noble, and full of majesty. When the entire sea of fire was condensed into a fire dragon, the fire dragon seemed to be completely alive, and it looked lifelike. Countless people were shocked and amazed by this, but none of these could affect Richard at the moment. He has already exerted the power of the dragon charm to the limit, and the dragon charm obviously did not let him down. The power of this blow is enough to destroy the entire New York City. And now this terrifying blow, under Richard's control, rushed directly towards the crack in the sky, and the space it passed was burning red. The figure behind the crack clearly sensed the terrifying blow, and under Richard's gaze, he raised his right hand with difficulty and waved his finger. Suddenly a terrifying scene happened. The fire dragon, which was originally extremely powerful, seemed to have experienced endless time in just a short time. The flames gradually extinguished under the erosion of time. Before and after the crack, it disappeared without a trace. Seeing this scene, Richard's eyelids jumped instantly. Although the expression on his face could not be seen under the shroud of the tiger-shaped mask, he could see a flash of shock in his eyes. At this moment, he was panting slightly, and his chest was constantly heaving, which shows how much the blow just now consumed him. At least for a short time, Richard has no way to condense such an attack. But this terrifying blow finally dissipated without even touching the enemy. For a time, Richard was ready to flee. Now he is definitely not that person's opponent. However, before Richard could set off to flee, above the sky, the accident will rise again. Just hearing a loud dragon roar, it exploded in Richard's ear, the sky turned transparent at this moment, and the cosmic galaxy was exposed in front of Richard's eyes. At the same time, a dreamy, 177, river also slowly appeared in the universe galaxy. This dreamy river doesn't know where it starts or where it goes, but Richard looks at this long river, but he can feel an eternal breath. And above this long river, a young man radiating light is standing in the long river, as if he wants to completely integrate into the long river of time, and is constantly struggling to sink. But the sudden sound of the dragon's roar instantly alarmed the young man, causing him to subconsciously raise his head and look towards the upstream of the long river of time, his eyes full of astonishment. Following his gaze, Richard suddenly saw the upper reaches of the long river, and a huge dragon head was slowly emerging. Just ahead seems to occupy the entire universe, making the entire universe unable to accommodate it. Richard's breathing couldn't help but tighten for a while. Looking at the scarlet eyes on the dragon's head and the dark aura emanating from him, he felt a faint familiar aura. But before he could think about it, on the huge dragon head, the mouth was slightly open, and a vast voice sounded on the long river of time and space in an instant. Breaking into time and space, have you asked me? When the words fell, the dragon head disappeared in the upper reaches of the long river of time, and it was replaced by a dragon claw. As the dragon's claw slowly stretched, the dragon's claw immediately crossed the distance of the long river of time and came to the glowing young man. A dragon toe flexed slightly, and instantly set off an endless storm over the long river of time. What? The miserable mourning sound suddenly came from the mouth of the glowing young man. The dragon toe had not yet landed on him. The storm alone caused the flesh and blood on his body to be wiped out inch by inch, and evaporated on the river of time. When the dragon's toe officially landed on him, there was not even a moment's effort. The luminous youth instantly turned into molecules, dissolved in the long river of time, and disappeared. With all this over, the dragon's claws retracted upstream of the long river of time, turned into a dragon's head, and disappeared in a flash. At the same time, the cosmic galaxy that was originally exposed to everyone's eyes disappeared in an instant, along with the dark clouds over the sky and the cracks above the sky. Everything was as if it had never happened before. The sky was still blue, and the warm sunlight shone down from the sky and shone on the world. Richard floated in the air, his eyes were full of blurred colors, and he couldn't return to his senses for a long time. Not only the shock of what I saw and heard just now, but also at the last moment, when the dragon's claw turned into a dragon's head and disappeared, the eyes of those scarlet eyes fell on him. Those eyes were extremely human, as if they were greeting him, but also a playful joke, as if he had been an old friend with Richard for many years. Richard narrowed his eyes slightly, and already had some guesses in his heart, but he was not sure of the authenticity of the idea. What the truth is, I am afraid that it will only be revealed when he can travel the long river of time. At this moment, the cold electronic synthesis sound of the system came to mind in Richard's mind. Dangerous, 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 mission. Survive. Explanation. There is a strong man who has come from a long time and detected strong hostility to you, and survived from his hands. Reward. 1 designated lottery. Congratulations, you have completed the task, the reward has been issued, please check it yourself. Hearing the system's voice, Richard's thoughts were pulled back to reality, and his eyes suddenly lit up. Is this the mission accomplished? That's right, even though he didn't seem to do anything, he did survive. Designated lottery, that's not what you want or what you want. The 8 magic chi that Richard had been craving for a long time suddenly appeared in his mind. But it's obviously not a good time to draw a lottery right now. Richard can only hold back his excitement for a while. His eyes looked around in the air, and soon, Richard's eyes locked on the direction of the Rambo building, and when he moved, he instantly disappeared in place. The chicken charm volleyed into the air, and the rabbit charm accelerated. Richard's speed was extremely fast. In less than a second, Richard appeared in the sky above the Rambo building. At the same time, he also saw the magical foursome who fell to the ground in the Rambo building, and the dignified 3 Victor. Suddenly, Richard's figure flashed and appeared directly beside Peter. The whole person looked like a teleportation, but it was actually caused by his too fast speed. "What are you still dawdling about?" When Richard's words sounded, Victor and the others were instantly startled. They had been staring at the sky just now, and they didn't see Richard coming at all. Now that they found Richard's arrival, the 3 of them hurriedly lowered their heads and bowed respectfully. Random Victor said solemnly, "Just now I sense that some big terror is about to come, presumably Holy Lord, you also saw the scene of the sky being torn apart. Although I don't know why that feeling suddenly disappeared, I think we should just give up." After speaking, Victor glanced at the Fantastic Four with dread. Hearing this, Richard immediately understood the meaning of Victor's words, and at the same time reflected it. He was probably the only one who saw the scene in the universe just now, while the world still saw the sky. Thinking of this, Richard's heart suddenly became certain, and he waved his hand directly, interrupting Victor's words. "No nonsense, kill." After speaking, Richard looked directly into Victor's eyes, and a terrifying aura slowly radiated from his body. Victor couldn't help lowering his head for a while, not daring to look at Richard at all, just nodded heavily. "Yes." After speaking, Victor started again what he had not done before, while Richard stood by and watched this scene with narrowed eyes. If his original attitude towards the Fantastic Four was between killing and not killing, then after realizing that the Fantastic Four might have something to do with the luminous young man, the 4 of them were already on Richard the must-see list. Richard didn't want to leave a great enemy for his future. Under Richard's gaze, Victor put the mysterious power of the Fantastic Four into one. And as the power in their bodies was evacuated, the magical foursome became mortals again, and because they couldn't bear the injuries left by the previous battles, they went to the end of their lives. Watching this scene, Richard didn't have the slightest emotional fluctuation in his eyes. He made a retreat gesture, and his figure disappeared instantly. Looking at this scene, Peter, Dr. Octopus and Victor also used their own means to leave the place. For a time, only a mess and 4 corpses were left here. And not long after Richard and others left, the military completely surrounded the entire Rambo building, and when they came to the top floor, they looked at the disfigured scene that had been destroyed. Everyone's eyes were very serious. The leading major looked around and waved his hand majestically. "Clean up this place and take everything away." "Yes." The surrounding soldiers responded with a sound, and immediately took action. On the other side, the dark shadow core that was originally densely distributed in every corner of the TV station turned into a black shadow and merged into the ground not long after Richard left the TV station, leaving no trace, as if it had never appeared. Everyone in the TV station looked at the disappearing black shadow core, and their originally uneasy and fearful hearts gradually calmed down. Some people tried to walk outside the TV station. When the first person stepped out of the TV station door, there was no accident. All of a sudden everyone went crazy. They hurried to the door without saying a word, and escaped from the TV station, which they regarded as a devil's den. In just a few minutes, the entire TV station was empty and completely turned into an empty city. Richard didn't care about these trivial things. All the goals he set this time have been completed. Although a little accident happened, the situation is still under control. After leaving the Rambo building, Richard went home first. When he got home, Vanessa didn't ask Richard why he didn't return last night, but looked at Richard worriedly and saw that he was not injured. "Performance, I was relieved." Seeing her appearance, Richard, who was indifferent, suddenly felt a little distressed in his heart, and couldn't help asking himself if it was a bit too much for him not to return overnight. Of course, all these emotions are only presented in the bottom of my heart, and Richard did not reveal it on the surface. Giving Vanessa a comforting hug, Richard pretended to be a child and yelled that he was hungry, and immediately made Vanessa hurried into the kitchen to prepare Richard's favorite Chinese food. Richard took advantage of the situation to return to his room, directly called up the system panel, and fell into contemplation. Character Attributes Panel. Name: Richard Fisk. Age: 9 years old. Status: son of Wilson Fisker. Skills: Ninja Core, Claw Core, Giant Shadow Core, Sheep Charm, Snake Charm, Dragon Charm, Chicken Charm, Rabbit Charm. Items: Cup of Life, Penku's Box. Sweepstakes: 1 designated sweepstakes. Members of the Dark Alliance. Dr. Octopus, Spider-Man, Dr. Doom. This time, the temporarily triggered 3 danger mission brought Richard a designated lottery. As the name suggests, the previous lottery draws required luck, but this time Richard wanted to draw whatever he wanted. For a time, Richard's mind couldn't help but become active. Spells, shadow troops, and demonic energy all flashed in his mind. There is no doubt that Richard wants all of these things, but the deficit wants to confirm one other thing than these things. Can the system only extract things from the somber core world, or can it extract things from more worlds? Thinking of this, Richard said with a tentative tone, extract the ability to transform into Tiga. Ding, the follow-up world is not yet open, please draw in the current world, so stay tuned. Puff. Listening to this, Richard almost didn't come up in one breath. God TND, please look forward to it. Shaking his head speechlessly, Richard temporarily put the thought behind him. Although it was a bit disappointing, it was also expected, otherwise it would be impossible for only one world to come out for such a long time. Not bothering about this matter, Richard quickly decided what he wanted to extract, and said silently in his heart. Extract the magic energy of the Moon Demon. As the voice in Richard's heart fell, the system responded instantly. Ding, congratulations on obtaining the devilish energy of the Moon Demon. After that, a cool feeling melted from the top of Richard's head, and Reichardt's body floated involuntarily for a while, and the silver brilliance slowly shone on his body. And on his forehead, a crescent mark appeared involuntarily at this moment, making him look more and more handsome. The whole process lasted for a few minutes, and the brilliance of the green tea body gradually dissipated, and at the same time, the whole person slowly fell from the air. When he opened his eyes, a flash of excitement flashed in Richard's eyes, and when he reached out and raised it, everything in the room instantly floated up, as if he was in the vacuum of the universe, and he couldn't feel anything, the presence of gravity. And as he pushed back with the palm of his hand, gravity reappeared, and everything in the room returned to me. The Devil's Curse blue of the moon controls the force of gravity. As one of the 4 basic forces of the universe, gravity is self-evidently powerful. Even at this moment, as long as Richard is willing, he can completely relocate the entire Mercury star to the established orbit with his own power. Of course, Richard would not do this, otherwise, once the water blue star deviates from the established orbit, the consequence will be the eruption of biological tides, and the entire planet will usher in a doomsday disaster. After being excited for a while, Richard gradually suppressed the throbbing in his heart and calmed himself down again. After the mood was completely calm, Richard pushed the door and walked out of the room. After entering the living room, Fang Lisa had already prepared Richard's favorite meals. Obediently swept away all the meals on the table, Richard and Vanessa said hello and planned to go out. He still had some things to deal with. But before leaving, Vanessa suddenly stopped him, came to him, patted his head, and said softly, Richard, pay attention to safety, remember to go home at night. Hearing Vanessa's advice, Richard opened his mouth, and for the first time found that his clever eloquence was useless in front of Vanessa, and he could only silently nodded. The laboratory on the 5th floor in the Bronx, Richard left home and came here. As soon as he entered the door, a painful cry rang out in the laboratory. Richard looked up and saw that Dr. Octopus, who had returned to the laboratory, was fiddling with his mechanical tentacles again. The whining sound naturally came from the mouth of the test subject, Char. In order to be able to completely transplant the mechanical assistant into the human body, Char's entire back was opened by Dr. Octopus, and the scene looked terrifying. Even Richard couldn't help frowning slightly when he saw this scene. Let Richard kill, he won't even blink, but let him dissect the human body, but Richard can't do it. After all, he is neither a scientific maniac like Dr. Octopus, nor a pervert, nor is he tortured for fun idea. At that moment, Richard shook his head and interrupted Dr. Octopus's experiment. Wait, I want to chat with him. As Richard spoke, Dr. Octopus, who was immersed in the experiment, suddenly came back to his senses. It was not surprising to see Richard's arrival. He nodded and walked to the data analysis room beside him. For a while, only Richard and Char were left in the experiment hall. Seeing Richard's arrival, Char, as if the drowning man had grabbed the last straw, said anxiously, Save me, Mr. Richard, I'm so sorry for what I've done, I swear, that must not be my intention. Save me, I will listen to you no matter what you say in the future. As long as you don't let me stay here, you can let me do anything. Listening to Char's hasty words, Richard glanced at him with some pity. What exactly did Dr. Octopus do to him? It actually made a former Hydra agent collapse into this state. However, he came this time to find Char, so Richard did not refuse his request, but just stood there and looked down at him and said, "It seems that you have recognized the mistake, but this is not enough. Wait for Dr. Octopus. After the experiment is completed, I will let you go, and then you need to do one thing, go back to the Hydra, climb up, the higher the climb, the better." Richard spoke slowly, his tone full of calmness, but Charles's expression collapsed when he heard it, and the brilliance in his eyes gradually dimmed. It's not because of the mission that Richard ordered, but because he has to stay here until the end of Dr. Octopus' experiment, which means that he will have to endure under that inhuman torture for an unknown amount of time. Looking at his appearance, Richard's mouth suddenly showed a gentleman's smile, and then he bent slightly and said, "It seems that you have a lot of opinions on my arrangement. If so, then you can stay here forever. Maybe I can find someone else to do the job." As soon as these words came out, Char's heart froze, and the whole person instantly seemed to be alive, and quickly said, "No, I don't mean that, Mr. Richard, I believe that no one will know Juju better than me. Snake, please don't change people, I'm willing to cooperate with the experiment, I just hope that after the experiment is over, you can take me out of here as soon as possible." Char said loudly, his tone full of sincerity. Although he still needs to cooperate to complete an experiment, and he doesn't know when it will end, in comparison, there is still hope. If he really stayed here forever, he would rather die than enjoy the torture of life rather than death. Therefore, what people fear most is comparison. Without comparison, there is no harm. Listening to Char's assurance, Richard nodded noncommittally, turned and walked to the data analysis room beside him. With the door closed, Char in the experiment hall was completely isolated. Richard stood at the door and looked at Dr. Octopus, who was looking at a pile of materials, and said in a casual tone, "How long will your experiment take? I am useful to that person." Hearing this, Dr. Octopus was silent for a while, and finally gave a specific time, 2 months, if 2 months have not ended, then there is no need to continue. After listening, Richard nodded and dropped a sentence, "Don't kill me, and don't break his head." When the words fell, Richard turned around and pushed the door and walked out, and behind him came the respectful voice of Dr. Octopus, "I understand, boss." Without continuing to stay in the laboratory, Richard quickly left the Bronx and headed to the Emperor's building. Originally, Richard had only one task today, let's see how Char was trained, and arrange tasks for him by the way. But not long after he went out, he received a call from Jin Bing and asked him to go to the Emperor building to chat. So Richard had to turn to the Emperor's building when he was done. On the top floor of the Emperor's building, in Jin Bing's office, there is only Jin Bing in the entire office at this moment, but at this moment, a black shadow swept in from the window. In the blink of an eye, Richard's figure appeared on the sofa in the office. Looking at Jin Bing, who was sitting on the office chair, Richard rolled his eyes. He was too lazy to sit on the sofa and relax. "Father, why did you ask me to come here? My mother is still waiting for me to come home." As Richard's voice sounded, Jin Yan immediately put down the things in his hand, and there was no surprise on Richard's face, who suddenly appeared in the office. "Diaresis, I want to retire, so I want to hand over my underground kingdom to you, what do you think?" Hearing this, Richard stood up like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. What are you kidding me? I'm only 9 years old, you let me mix with society, and you still want to retire?" Richard said exaggeratedly, looking very excited. Part of it was intentional, part of it was indeed his real reaction. While listening to Richard's words, Jin Ning looked at him calmly. Although he didn't say a word, his meaning was very obvious. "You also know that you are only 9 years old, and when you were 9 years old, you almost overturned the entire New York City, what else do you think?" Under Jin Bing's gaze, Richard felt a rare embarrassment in his heart, touched his nose subconsciously, but still refused decisively. "You still give up. Even if I agree, Nisa Li Jiaojiao will not agree. If you dare to forcibly throw it to me, I will go back and file a complaint now." Having said that, Richard directly played a rogue. At this moment, he really felt Jin and wanted to hand over the entire underground kingdom to him, not joking with him. But Richard didn't want to accept it. The reason is very simple. He can control thousands of people, but he can't control hundreds of thousands of people. It's not a matter of ability, but that was too tiring for him, so after expressly refusing, Richard left the office quickly, not giving Jin a chance to continue speaking, leaving Jin and smiling helplessly, and continued to lower his head to deal with things. Obviously this underground emperor is not so easy to be. Elijah College, the elite college in New York City, is famous all over the world, and it is the real top college. It is summer now, the air is full of dryness and heat, and the campus is full of young girls with long legs, which is a feast for the eyes. As the school bell rang, the students in the classroom came out like beasts. One by one, they left the classroom cheering, instantly breaking the silence in the academy. Of course, this is not the case for all the students in the classroom. A certain class on the third floor of the teaching building seemed very quiet at the moment. The teacher sorted out the lesson plan silently, and the students quietly sorted their desks. After everything was done, they got up one by one and slowly left the classroom. After stepping out of the classroom, everyone breathed a sigh of relief and cautiously looked back at a figure in the corner of the classroom, then quickly retracted their eyes and walked away quickly. At this time, on a desk in the corner of the classroom, a teenager was slowly getting up from the desk, with a hint of laziness on his face. The sun shines on him through the window, and the whole classroom is filled with a comfortable atmosphere for a while. He didn't organize his desk because there was nothing on his desk, not even a textbook. The boy just got up and walked out of the classroom. His body is tall, straight and slender, his golden and soft hair is scattered on his forehead, his facial features are standard star templates, and he is a handsome young man. The handsome boy was supposed to be very popular on campus, but in fact, when he walked out of the classroom, all the students, male and female, automatically dispersed to the side. There were even people who, after seeing him from a distance, turned around and left without saying a word, not daring to meet him at all. The reason is only because the teenager's name is Richard Fisker. Maybe this name was not known to the people of this college 2 years ago, but when Richard stepped into the campus 2 years ago, the name quickly became popular on the entire campus. School bullying is something that cannot be avoided in any country, especially in the Stars and Stripes Federation, which is founded on democracy and freedom. Things like school bullying have become more blatant, especially in high school. Even for this kind of thing, the school basically ignores it, and the students only think this kind of thing is cool, and they don't consider the feelings of the bullied at all. Even think that the bullied person is a cowardly coward. Therefore, every freshman season, there will always be some bored students who take pleasure in bullying freshmen. Unfortunately, they targeted Richard. The reason is because Richard is the most handsome among the freshmen in this class, attracting the attention of too many girls, making the teenagers and adolescents feel angry and jealous. Therefore, on the second day of the freshmen's admission, these people blatantly broke into Richard's classroom, intending to do some bad behavior, but Richard broke his hands and threw them out. If only this was the case, the students in the academy would not be so afraid, but on the second day, the parents of these people found the school, not only to ask Richard to apologize, but also to sue Richard and send Richard to the school, to prison. Because some of these parents have strong influence, the school does not ask about this matter at all. As a result, what happened later, even the movie did not dare to shoot like this. A group of brawny men in suits broke into the classroom directly. Facing the domineering parents of the students, they shut them up with black muzzles. Faced with such a situation, the vast majority of sensible parents kept their mouths shut, but one of them, who held his own identity, directly moved out of his identity background. But before he could finish speaking, Richard suddenly said something. "It's too noisy, can you be quiet?" The words fell, the gunshots rang out, and the parents who were still chattering suddenly had a blood hole in their foreheads. The world is completely quiet, and the entire campus is quiet because of this. In a crime-prone place like the Stars and Stripes, even if they are just students, they have seen too many shootings. But I have never seen it, just because of a random sentence, a shooting broke out, and it was still in full view. Since then, the environment around Richard has fallen into absolute silence, including CGBG class time. The teacher pays special attention to the decibel of his tone when he lectures, for fear that he will accidentally quarrel with someone and ruin his own life. Back then, there was a lot of noise on the whole campus, and even most people were still speculating about the follow-up development of this incident, but everything that day seemed to have never happened. Richard went to class on time every day, was never absent, and never had anyone from the police department find the school. It was as if not a person but a cat and dog died that day. Therefore, even though it has been 2 years, Richard is still a taboo in the campus, and everyone dares not approach him when they meet him. Even if some freshmen were curious about this, under the atmosphere of the entire campus, they would not dare to approach Richard again. But not everyone is like this. At least one person gives Richard a headache. When Richard came down from the teaching building, a woman was standing in front of the teaching building waiting for him. She has long brown hair that blows in the breeze with the breeze, and the white sting has perfect facial features on her cheeks, which are more beautiful than the fairy in legend. A popular school uniform was worn on her body and became the most expensive luxury item in the world. On her straight and slender legs, a pair of black over-the-knee socks covered her tender skin. When she saw Richard, instead of dodging like others, an excited smile appeared on her face. "Hi Richard, I'm here." Hearing the greeting from not far away, Richard tapped his head with a headache, ignored her at all, turned around and walked towards the school gate. But after a while, the girl suddenly got out of her side, took his arm and smiled. "Let's go to the movies. There is a new movie released today. I heard that it is the most popular with boys. In addition, after watching the movie, we can go shopping together. It's been a long time since you went shopping with me last time. You are not allowed to refuse me this time." Hearing the girl Monica's words, Richard rolled his eyes helplessly. If his memory is correct, the last time he went shopping was when he was 10 years old. The teacher took them to the library to visit, and then Monica invited him to eat an ice cream. Apart from that, Richard never went out on the street with Monica again. Richard and Monica walked towards the gate of the campus, looking like golden boys and girls. I don't know how many pedestrians cast their gazes along the way, and both Richard and Monica are used to these glances. Monica was still nagging in Richard's ear to herself, holding Richard's arms tightly with both hands. And although Richard didn't respond, he didn't shake off her hands either. It was a tacit consent. The two have known each other since they were 9 years old, and it has been 7 years since they were childhood sweethearts. In these years, apart from Kim and Vanessa, only Monica can do such an intimate action to Richard. Since that day 7 years ago, Jinan tried to hand over the entire underground kingdom to himself, Richard has been completely learned. Quietly became a diligent and studious, good student. Otherwise, if you are not careful, you will be caught by Jin and will inherit the entire underground kingdom. In this regard, Richard just wants to say that he is too difficult. While focusing on his studies, Richard's learning status can be said to be improving steadily by virtue of his own talents, and he has perfectly completed the gorgeous transition from being a scumbag to being a scholar. In order to stay by Richard's side, Monica also studied hard and eventually got into the same academy as Richard, but unfortunately she was not assigned to the same class. So every day after school, Monica would wait for Richard under the teaching building. When the two came to the gate of the campus, a look of reluctance appeared on Monica's face. Looking up at Richard, he said aggrievedly, "This is the 892nd time you have rejected me. When did you agree to date me to watch a movie?" While speaking, Monica shook Richard's arm, looking like a spoiled child. But Richard, who was familiar with her nature, was unmoved at all, turned his head to look at her, and said in a lazy tone, "I'll think about it again when it's the 1000th time." After that, Richard raised his legs and walked towards the car that was already waiting across the street, while Monica stood there, looking at Richard's leaving back with gritted teeth, wishing to rush to bite him fiercely one bite. As a beautiful woman with good looks and figure, she has been chasing Richard for several years, but Richard is like an iceberg, not melting for her enthusiasm at all. For this, Monica felt a sense of frustration for a while, but it also aroused her strong competitive spirit. Therefore, the gnashing look on her face quickly disappeared, replaced by a confident look. "HMPH, you won't be able to escape my grasp sooner or later, just wait and see." With an arrogant snort, Monica also turned around and walked towards the car on the other side. As the footsteps moved forward and touched, the smile on his face gradually dissipated, and when he came to the front of the car, a strong aura was already shrouded in his body. A white woman in the cab quickly got out of the car and greeted her respectfully, "Miss Monica." As he spoke, he quickly opened the rear door, and Monica nodded with a frosty look on her face, and then sat up. Since that accident that year, Monica's father died, and Monica's mother also died in the following 3 years. Since the age of 12, Monica has independently been in charge of a listed group. From the panic at the beginning, it became more and more comfortable in the end, and the group developed and expanded. Although Monica is only 16 years old now, she is already the chairman of a group worth more than 1 billion stars. Therefore, don't look at her silly appearance in front of Richard, but in front of others, her face will always have the look of strangers. It is precisely because of this that Richard ignores this little girl and is not afraid of hurting her. Her heart is much stronger than ordinary people. As for why Richard knew about this, it was naturally because when Monica was in control of the group, Richard helped a lot in secret. Otherwise, it would be impossible for a 12-year-old girl to control a group. On the other side, in the car Richard was riding, Daniel was still driving for Richard, and Daniel looked the same as 7 years ago. But he's a little more balanced and stronger than he was 7 years ago. 7 years is enough time to change too many things. For example, the once dangerous human augmentation agent has become less dangerous. Although there are still risks after injection, it is basically negligible. And Daniel, who has been serving Richard's side all the time, also obtained the qualification to inject human body enhancers and gained powerful strength. Katakana middle dot 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 katakana middle dot. The Dark Alliance, which was once famous throughout the Star-Striped Federation, has now become a major force. Since the live broadcast that year, a large number of members who tend to be dark joined the Dark Alliance. From then on, the Dark Alliance is no longer a big cat and a kitten. 2 or 3. They gathered under Richard's command, obeyed Richard's orders, and became the top power in the supernatural world. The only regret is that the latter people who joined the Dark Alliance on their own have not been recognized by the system, so Richard did not receive rewards. In addition to the Dark Alliance, another chess piece placed by Richard also brought a great surprise to Richard. After 2 months of inhuman experiments, Dr. Octopus' experiment on Char was finally successful, and Char was relieved of his misery as he wished and returned to Hydra. In order to be able to enter the core layer of Hydra, over the years, Char has tried desperately to win over members of the Federation and use them to improve his status, but unfortunately it has had little success. After all, Char is only a middle-level member of Hydra, and he can't bring much benefit to these Federation members, so the so-called wooing has naturally become a joke. But later Charles had to turn to Richard, and Richard also remembered something he had forgotten for a long time at this time, the Cup of Life. The Cup of Life is like a chicken rib for Richard, it is tasteless to eat, and it is a pity to abandon it. But for ordinary people, the effect of the Cup of Life is definitely their lifelong pursuit. After all, from ancient times to the present, people have been pursuing eternal life, whether it is in the East or the West. Therefore, Char's request for help allowed Richard to find the use of the Cup of Life, and suddenly a product called the Religion of Life was born within the Star-Stripe Federation. Using immortality as a bait, it attracted countless members of the Star-Striped Federation to join the Life God religion. In the end, the Life God religion completely developed into a behemoth within the Star-Striped Federation in just a few years. Therefore, in the past 7 years, Richard seems to have done nothing, but in fact, both strength and power have reached a terrifying level. On Saturday, it was sunny and the weather was as sunny as usual, but the mood of the people of New York City seemed very heavy. 2 weeks ago, Tony Stark, the chairman of Stark Industries Group, unexpectedly disappeared, which eventually caused the stock of Stark Industries Group to be volatile. Half a month later, Tony, who was missing, returned to Stark Group again, and held a press conference to announce the closure of Stark's military manufacturing. As soon as the news came out, the entire Federation was in an uproar, and the stock of Stark Group fell off a cliff. Many investors suffered heavy losses because of this, which caused the people in New York City to be full of haze. Even if the sun is still bright, it can't dispel the gloom in everyone's heart. At the same time, within the Stadt Industrial Group, Abadia Stan was looking at Tony with cannibalistic eyes, with a terrifying light flashing in his eyes. The board of directors did not approve your proposal. Who allowed you to close the military manufacturing department without authorization? Do you know how much loss this has brought us? Just now, our market value has evaporated by tens of billions, and it is still falling. Do you know what you are doing? The words that gritted his teeth were spit out from DIA's mouth one by one. His hands were on the desk, and the blue veins at his temples kept beating, giving people a feeling that they might explode at any time. You can imagine how angry he was. Tony, who was sitting opposite Dia, listened to DIA's words but didn't care. He focused on playing with the data in front of him, and said without raising his head, "Trust my uncle, all this can be salvaged, it's only temporary now." And do you know what happened to me when I was kidnapped? The weapons made by our group came to my head, and I almost died in that desert, so you can understand me, right? Listening to Tony's disdainful words, Dia laughed angrily, and a cold light flashed across the depths of his eyes. But soon all these emotions disappeared from his face, as if they had never appeared. I'm old, and the Stark Group will eventually be handed over to you. I just hope you won't let me down. With a pretentious sigh, Dia didn't stay any longer, turned around and walked out of Tony's office. Behind him, Tony's voice also sounded at this moment, "Thank you, uncle, for your understanding. During this time, the group affairs will be handed over to you. I won't come to the company if I have something to do." Hearing this, DIA's footsteps stopped and he didn't look back, and his face was completely gloomy, which made people feel inexplicably scared. At the same time, Richard, who had just left home, sat in the car and looked at the newspaper in his hand. His brows moved slightly, and a thoughtful look flashed on his face. After reading what was reported in the newspaper, Richard put the newspaper aside, leaned back slightly, put his hands on his thighs, and tapped the back of his right hand with the index finger of his left hand. The thoughts in his mind were fast, turned up. Iron Man, the most special existence among all Marvel heroes, does not possess any superpowers, but with a smart brain, he has obtained the power to be on par with the gods. If you want to say what is the most precious thing in Iron Man, it is not the so-called steel armor, nor the new energy source in Tony's chest, but the head on Tony's head. It is the most valuable existence in the entire Iron Man. There are many smart people in the world, and there are even people who are smarter than Tony, but why only Tony invented epic-making items? It was because of his head and the light that flashed in his head from time to time. As far as scientific research is concerned, a smart person may be an excellent scientist, but he will never be an epic-making scientist. The gap between the two sides is in the flash of aura in the mind. This is an innate talent that cannot be envied. So since time traveled to Marvel, Richard has always had a strong idea that he must get him. If not, destroy him. In a word, it is either used by me or destroyed by me. A series of plans flashed through her mind, and soon Lisa had a general plan in her heart, but this was only a preliminary direction, and he needed to implement the specific details slowly. As his eyes opened, Richard looked at Daniel, who was silent in the driver's seat, and said, "Notify Char and let him fully acquire the stocks of the Stark Group that are circulating on the market, and charge as much as you can. In short, I only have one request. I don't want to see the world. Stark stock is still in circulation." Hearing this, Daniel simply nodded. "I understand, Mr. Richard." Chapter 91. After Richard finished speaking, he no longer paid attention to this matter, and the rest of the matter would naturally be handled by his subordinates. Richard didn't need to worry too much, he only needed to issue an order. After dropping Richard off to school, Daniel quickly dialed Char's phone and conveyed Richard's instructions. As for Richard's order, Char naturally did not dare to delay, not to mention the shadow left in the laboratory. Since Richard took out the cup of life, Char was unable to resist the temptation of immortality and finally drank it. The water of life was completely controlled by Richard. Therefore, Richard's command is his highest will. For him and the whole life religion, Richard is their god, the one who gives them eternal life. Soon, Charles directly passed Richard's order to all members of the God of Life. After years of development, the life god religion has become a behemoth, but its structure is very simple, and there is not much hierarchy. In addition to the peripheral members, there are only 100 core members in total. Among the 100 core members, all of them are either high-level executives of the Star Stripe Federation, who hold huge power in their hands, or those who have tens of billions of assets. Its worth is not bad even compared to the Stark Group at its peak. There are even people from major families among the core members. However, the identities of these people are all kept secret. Except for Richard, who knows the identities of all the members. Even Char, the founder of the God of Life, only knows the information of some members. Therefore, he just passed the task to the 100 core members. As for the specific operation, Char does not know or understand. Anyway, he only needs to report the final result. Not long after Charles passed on the task, there was an uproar in the stock market. New York City, the stock exchange, and the stock of the once extremely popular Stark Industries Group, ushered in a cliff-like decline as Tony announced the closure of the military manufacturing department. Many investors have sold their stocks one after another, wanting to withdraw from the quagmire of Stark Industries Group, but no one is a fool, so most of the stocks in their hands can only be rotten in their hands, and no one cares at all. But just now, a mysterious capital force suddenly appeared in the capital market, wantonly buying Stark Industries stock. For a time, all the shareholders who held Stark Industrial stocks, as if they had caught the last straw, sold their stocks at the lowest price. In just 3 hours, all the outstanding shares of Stark Industries on the market were swept away, and by the time everyone reacted, the transaction had been completed. For a time, the stocks of Stark Industries, except for a few people who held on tight, finally all gathered into the hands of the mysterious capital force. As the CEO of Stark Industries, the change in the stock market immediately alerted Dia. After listening to the assistant's report, Dia instantly smelled the conspiracy. As a mature business capitalist, Dia felt faintly that someone was deliberately targeting Stark Industries. This made Dia very angry, but there was nothing he could do, because after he reacted, the mysterious capital force in the market had disappeared. At this moment, Dia's mobile phone on the table suddenly rang. Looking at the caller ID, Dia's eyes and pupils shrank suddenly, waved his assistant away, and then the call was connected. As the call was connected, a fierce tone suddenly came from the phone. "Mr. Stan, I have something here. I think you will be very interested. Do you have time to meet and chat?" The voice fell, and the computer in front of Dia suddenly made a light sound, and then a video popped up. In the video, a pair of silver-white broken armor is standing quietly. When the video is finished, it will be destroyed automatically. And Dia's face became extremely serious at this moment, and she said in a deep voice, "Then have a good talk." After that, Dia hung up the phone, got up and left the office. On campus, Richard soon received a report from Daniel that the stock acquisition had been completed. Richard gave a rare compliment to this, "Well done." Instantly, Daniel, who was on the other side of the phone, was a little flattered. However, the stocks circulating on the market alone cannot satisfy Richard's appetite, so Richard quickly gave an order again. "Tell Char to find a way to acquire the shares held by the members of the Stark Group's board of directors. I don't care what means he uses, I want to become the first shareholder of the Stark Group." Hearing this, Daniel on the other end of the phone took a deep breath. Although he didn't invest much in stocks, he had heard of the Stark Group's reputation. As a military giant in New York City, even if the Stark Group has been turbulent recently, it is definitely not an easy thing to become the first shareholder of such a group, and it can even be said to be as difficult as the sky. Therefore, facing Richard's order, Daniel raised doubts for the first time. "Mr. Richard, I'm afraid this is difficult to do. Unless the Stark Group goes to the end, those on the board will not sell their stocks so easily. And behind the Stark Group is the military. Once we use other means, there may be a violent conflict with the military, and it is very likely that the task you have explained will not be completed." As he spoke, Daniel felt a bit of anxiety in his heart. It's not that he is anxious to be the enemy of the military, but that he is afraid that he will not be able to complete the task that Richard explained. Facing Daniel's doubts, Richard did not give much explanation, but said indifferently, "You don't have to worry, this matter is still handed over to Char, you just need to hand over the task to him, already." After that, Richard hung up the phone, and a strange color appeared in Daniel's eyes on the other end of the phone. Although he has been by Richard's side all these years, he does not know much about the Dark Alliance and the religion of life. Not to mention that, quietly, Richard has developed two behemoths. Therefore, for Richard's order, Daniel suddenly became curious about how much power Richard had in his hands. After thinking silently for a while, Daniel shook his head and quickly threw the curiosity out of his mind. Having been by Richard's side all the year round, he knows too well what curiosity killed the cat, so it's better not to know some things. Richard naturally didn't know about Daniel's curiosity. After hanging up the phone, Richard silently perfected his plan in his heart. To be honest, Richard doesn't have much confidence in blackening Tony. Because Tony's character is so complicated that you don't even know what choice he will make in a matter, which makes things full of surprises and makes it much more difficult to blacken him. If Tony hadn't had that smart head, Richard would have wanted to kill him directly, rather than spend his time trying to blacken him. But who made Tony a talent? Richard has always been tolerant of talent. Although Tony's character is complicated, there is one obvious point, that is arrogance. He is full of confidence in his own wisdom, so he develops a self-centered pride. He doesn't care what others think or what others think, only his own feelings. So the first step to blacken him is to shatter his arrogance and let him lower the head that has always been high. So what Richard has to do is to join Stark Industries. Don't watch Stark Industries as the background board in the movie, but Tony can become Iron Man, all relying on the financial support provided by Stark Industries. Otherwise, no matter how clever the idea, if it can't become a reality, it is just an idea after all. So Richard is looking forward to how he will feel when Tony exposes his identity as Iron Man, causing Stark Group's stock to rise sharply, and suddenly finds out that the company's first shareholder is no longer him. Thinking of this, a smile appeared on Richard's mouth, and a bright light flashed in his eyes. At this time, Daniel also conveyed Richard's order to Char. After receiving the order, the behemoth of the life god cult erupted again with its terrifying power. The religion of life is filled with a group of people who yearn for immortality. In addition to 100 core members, there are more than 1,000 peripheral members. These people themselves do not have any great power, but their assets, their status, are spread across all walks of life around the world. Therefore, in front of such a behemoth, although the Stark Industries group is huge, it is still incomparable to the giant of the God of Life. Under the power of the religion of life, all the board members of Stark Industries were dug out. And immediately someone went to buy their shares in Stark Industries. Although Stark Industries has been turbulent recently, anyone with a discerning eye can see that all this is only temporary, especially the members of the board of directors. The shares in their hands are simply more difficult than reaching the sky. Therefore, in the face of the acquisition of the God of Life, everyone chose to refuse. And being able to become members of the board of directors of Stark Industries Group, the status of these people is also not simple. In addition to holding the shares of Stark Industries, each of them has a lot of industries under their names. So just after they rejected the acquisition of the Life God cult, the disaster began. They seem to have become the public enemies of the world overnight, being surrounded and suppressed by hostile companies in the past, and even some industries have been suppressed by leading companies. These things happened very suddenly, and there was no warning, so they were completely caught off guard. In less than 3 days, 2/5 of their assets evaporated. For this, the Life Religion Party also paid a high price. After all, if you want to suppress an industry, there is no other way but to burn money. But I can't stand the wealth of the God of Life, and I'm not afraid of burning money at all, and tens of billions of federal coins are constantly being put into the market. The industries under the names of the various board members of Stark Industries simply could not withstand such a huge impact, and their assets evaporated again. Finally, after the 5th day, all the board members of Stark Industries Group received an invitation letter from the Religion of Life. Invite them to a hotel in Madrid. Madrid Hotel, a super 5-star hotel in New York City, whose hotel industry spreads throughout the Stars and Stripes Federation, is a giant in this industry. And the chairman of the Madrid Hotel, George Barton, is one of the peripheral members of the Church of Life. He heard the rumors of the God of Life by chance, and when he first heard of the God of Life, George scoffed at it. After all, the pursuit of longevity by the rich is no longer a secret, so some people have specially developed various brain-boosting needles, longevity medicines, and even outrageous hair transplants for the money in the pockets of these rich people. Use this to fool these people who hold huge amounts of wealth. Therefore, at first, George thought that the God of Life was a life-sustaining game created by which organization, and he didn't bother to pay attention to it. But when he witnessed his nemesis Pris getting 10 years younger at a banquet, George's heart set off a storm. As the saying goes, people who know you best are often not your friends, but your enemies. George knew Price very well. Although Price was a genius in business, he felt like he was dying because he was frail and sick since he was a child. It seems that at any time it is possible to die in the next second. But at that banquet, Pris blushed, the whole person couldn't be healthier, and there was no feeling of dying at all. So after that, George wanted to know what was going on like crazy. After spending a lot of money to investigate, the religion of life came into George's eyes again. This time, George didn't ignore it anymore, but sank his heart to understand the religion of life carefully. However, the more he understood, the greater the shock of the religion of life to him. Finally, after witnessing one of the members drink the water of life and become younger, George went completely crazy. No one is not afraid of death, even the richer you are, the more afraid of death. After all, they have spent their whole lives and worked hard, and in the end, they have no time to enjoy themselves, and their lives have come to an end. How can they be reconciled? Therefore, after spending a lot of money, George successfully joined the God of Life and became a peripheral member, and got a glass of water of life as he wished. At that moment, George felt that this was God's gift to him. Especially when his body became younger, George was even more excited and couldn't help himself. But even so, George is still not reconciled. He is not reconciled to being only a peripheral member. He wants to become a core member of the life God religion and gain a longer life until he reaches immortality. And if you want to become a core member, the only way is to get the permission of Richard, the God of Life. Therefore, when he knew that the task this time was ordered by Richard himself, George's performance suddenly became very positive, and he had money and strength to contribute, in order to gain Richard's approval and become a core member of the religion of life. Among the large amount of funds evaporated this time, 1/3 of them were provided by him. And now he will also represent the God of Life in the final round of acquisition negotiations. 11 shareholders of Stark Industries came to the conference room on the top floor of the Madrid hotel one after another. When they saw each other, the gloomy look on their faces suddenly dissipated a lot. That's how people are. When you are the only one who is unlucky, you can't be depressed, but when the people around you are just as unlucky as yourself, you suddenly feel that it's no big deal. The 11 people sat quietly in the conference room without saying a word. Without making them wait too long, George, who was wearing a suit and leather collar, walked into the conference room. Compared to the gloom on the faces of everyone in the conference room, George at this moment can be described as high-spirited, looking at everyone with a smile at the corner of his mouth, and greeted, "Diaresis, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon Diaresis." Just after George finished greeting Li Lihao, some of the 11 people below suddenly stood up. Their eyes were filled with terrifying light, and they looked at George through gnashing teeth and said, "You are suppressing me these days, industry. Do you know how much money I lost? How dare you show up, you?" As this man fired, it immediately sparked the long-suppressed anger of the other 10 people, and all kinds of swear words came out of their mouths one after another, and everyone looked at George with cannibalistic eyes. Sight, I believe these people will definitely tear George to pieces. In the face of these people's curses, George was not affected in any way, and just said indifferently, "If you only want to scold me today, then you can go back." After the words fell, the meeting room fell silent in an instant. Go back? How can I go back? If this matter is not resolved, their assets will be completely evaporated. So George's words instantly calmed everyone down. Although everyone still stared at him badly, no one made any noise. Those who have been able to get to this point today are not human beings. They will never do meaningless things. The roar just now was just to gain the initiative for the next negotiation. Otherwise, if they really didn't intend to bow their heads, they wouldn't be sitting here right now. Below the conference room, a white man in a suit with golden glasses and a suit stared at George and said calmly, "How much are you going to pay to buy our shares?" As soon as these words came out, everyone's ears perked up instantly. This was related to the vital interests of everyone present, and they couldn't help but not care. When he heard this question, George even showed a bright smile, and slowly spit out 2 words, half. When the words fell, everyone at the scene widened their eyes, looking at George with almost anger. Half of George's mouth is naturally half the value of the shares in their hands, which means that George only intends to buy all the shares in their hands at half the price. For a while, before the white man in wearing glasses could speak, someone immediately patted the table and stood up. Fake, you eat 10, we definitely don't agree with this price. As this person spoke, everyone at the scene started drinking, and the scene seemed out of control for a while, and everyone seemed to be excited. Looking at this scene, George was not in a hurry, but the smile on his face slowly subsided, and a cold look gradually appeared in his eyes. 40%. As soon as these words came out, most of the people present shuddered with anger. Although they were not good people themselves, it was the first time they had seen such an ugly food. For a while, everyone started to curse again, but before they could speak, George's voice rang again. 30%. After speaking, ignoring the eyes of everyone who wanted to tear him apart, George's mouth twitched with disdain and said, "Now sign the share transfer contract. I will give you 30% of the market price. 10 minutes later, I will only give you the market price 20%. If you don't accept 20%, then you can go, the gate is over there. But I want to remind you, Sige, that if you leave this conference room, I guarantee that you will all go bankrupt." After that, George's eyes scanned the entire conference room from left to right. And everyone in the conference room was completely stunned at the moment. Now they finally realize what it means to be a knife, and I am a fish. George was holding their lives and deaths in his hands, trying to round them up and flatten them. It was all in George's thoughts, and they couldn't resist at all. In the same way, the God of Life has spent such a huge price to suppress these people. If they still use the original price to buy shares, it would be a joke. George can guarantee that if he takes these shares back at the original price, what awaits him will definitely not be any reward, but punishment, and it is even very likely that he will be expelled from the God of Life. So at this moment, he is naturally as ruthless as he can be slaughtered. As time passed, everyone didn't move, and George didn't care about that either. It wasn't him who should be worried anyway. Finally, after half the time, the first man with glasses to stand up was also the first to stand up at this moment. Without further ado, I came to George and directly signed the share transfer contract that George had already prepared. After doing all this, the man with glasses left the conference room, and among the remaining 10 people, several people were also ready to move. But before they could take the first step, George has slowly put away the glasses man's contract and said with a smile, "Now I only give 20%. As soon as George's voice fell, everyone was shocked. "No, you can't do this, 10 minutes haven't come yet." In this regard, George gave the speaker a disdainful look, and even owed his willingness to explain. And this scene also became the last straw that broke the camel's back. For a time, everyone rushed to the ground to sign the contract. Seeing how they were fighting, George laughed silently, and a look of anticipation flashed in his eyes. He seems to have seen the life religion, Richard, receiving him. Saturday, Rango Avenue. This is a highway with constant traffic every day, but today, Rango Avenue was closed for 3 hours. Just because Richard wanted to race here and didn't want anyone to influence him, this road was blocked. Driving the Lamborghini Venom at the speed limit of 300 km per hour on Longo Avenue, Richard's face was filled with excitement. 300 kilometers may be an extremely terrifying speed for ordinary people, but for Richard, who is wearing a rabbit charm, this speed is a bit slow. But this did not affect Richard's interest in racing. Because Richard was not racing to experience the extreme speed, but just for the sake of racing. After a back and forth on Rango Avenue, the car finally stopped at the starting point, and Richard got out of the car with 2 clear tire prints. He didn't even look at Lamborghini, who was already smoking white smoke behind him. This car, which has only been out of the factory for a few hours, has been completely scrapped after flying at the limit for 3 hours. Daniel looked at Richard, who was approaching, and quickly walked up to him, handing him water, and said respectfully, "Mr. Richard, what you ordered has been done, and most of the stocks in Stark Industries Group are done. All have been attributed to you, and you are now the largest shareholder of the Stark Group. Listening to Daniel's report, Richard kept walking, walked directly to another car, and sat in the back seat. The matter of the Stark Group was in his expectations, so it was nothing to be surprised. Anyway, it will take some time for this matter to really work, so after getting in the car, Richard temporarily left it behind. Behind his head, he said casually, "Send me to the Dark Alliance." Hearing this, Daniel, who was in the driver's seat, nodded silently, and the vehicle started to leave Longo Avenue. As for the scrapped Lamborghini, someone will deal with it later, and they don't need to worry about it. After Richard left, the blocked Longo Avenue was removed from the blockade. Carroll Building. This is a 22-story building. Originally, Carroll Building was inconspicuous in New York City, but with the arrival of the Dark Alliance, it officially became the headquarters of the Dark Alliance. The main members of the Dark Alliance are still Spider-Man, Dr. Octopus and Victor. But the number of peripheral personnel has reached thousands. Among them, there are scientists who are over 500 years old, and there are geniuses who have just reached adulthood but whose IQ exceeds 120. And they all have one thing in common, that is, their hearts are dark, they seem to be born with lack of emotion, they don't know what kindness is, and they ignore life. Therefore, although they are all elites, they are excluded in normal society. After all, no one likes an unsympathetic guy, so after the birth of the Dark Alliance, these people all fell into the arms of darkness. Richard provided them with support, allowing them to show their talents here, and even have the opportunity to gain superhuman strength, which is also the reason why they gathered in the Dark Alliance. As Daniel parked the car at the entrance of the Carroll Building, the two security members guarding the entrance of the Carroll Building quickly trotted over and respectfully opened the car door for Richard. The Carroll Building is not in a bustling area, so it looks a bit deserted from the outside, and even the security members are only the two at the door. But as Richard stepped into it, the scene in the building suddenly unfolded in front of Richard's eyes. The first to third floors of the Carlow Building belong to the rest area, and various entertainment facilities are filled between these three floors, including the canteen. The 4th to 10th floors are the residences of the members of the Dark Alliance. Until the 10th floor and up, it belongs to the core area of the Dark Alliance. Every floor here is guarded by the Sombra Corps. A large number of Sombra ninjas act as guards, showing on the bright side. In the shadows, there are countless Claw Shadow Corps hidden, standing here all year round. The laboratory previously established in the Bronx district has now also moved to the Carroll Building. Based on these researchers, the peripheral members of the Dark Alliance are engaged in their favorite scientific research, or study or research and development. In fact, the reason why the Dark Alliance has only recruited 1,000 peripheral members in 7 years is entirely because of the exclusion of a large number of non-scientific researchers and the existence of fishing in troubled waters. Otherwise, if you really let go, how could it be possible for a single Carlow Building to accommodate all the members of the Dark Alliance? After all, for Richard, scientific researchers are the most valuable beings, followed by those extraordinary people with great power. As for the force value of the bottom layer, the Shadow Corps completely replaced their existence, so there is no room for these people in the Dark Alliance. Chen took the elevator all the way to the top floor, the 22nd floor. As the elevator door opened, the two Sombra guards at the elevator door suddenly opened their scarlet eyes. After seeing Richard clearly, he bowed his head respectfully, took a step back, and closed his eyes again. The top floor of the 22nd floor is exclusive to Richard, and even the three of Dr. Octopus cannot step in without Richard's permission. Although Richard is often absent, and there are no secrets on this floor, it is still a forbidden place for everyone, and no one dares to violate it. And the reason for this is naturally because of the rules. Not Richard needs such rules, but the people below need such rules. Only in this way can they maintain their awe at all times and let them understand who is the master of the Dark Alliance. Sitting in his own office chair, Richard quietly closed his eyes and waited. He had already sent someone to notify Dr. Octopus and Victor. Since the establishment of the Dark Alliance, the two have basically stayed at the headquarters of the Dark Alliance, and even because they are both research madmen, they have a feeling of sympathy for each other. On the contrary, Peter, since he fell into the darkness, has completely indulged, and unless Richard calls it, he will never be able to find him in the Dark Alliance. He clearly belongs to the core members, but due to his frequent disappearance, he is completely transparent within the Dark Alliance, and even some peripheral members do not know his existence. Richard didn't wait too long, and soon, Dr. Octopus and Victor appeared in the office. The two looked at Richard sitting in the office chair, and a look of respect appeared on their faces, and just after they arrived, Richard closed his eyes and slowly opened his eyes. Katakana middle dot 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 katakana middle dot. His eyes glanced around the faces of the two, and finally Richard's eyes stayed on Victor's body, and said casually, "What happened? Talk about it." Hearing this, Victor nodded, and then said, "I feel that my deity is about to disappear. Lord, please save me." Hearing this, Richard didn't have any surprises on his face. It was because he heard this that he went to the Dark Alliance in person. He didn't speak at the moment, but just raised his head at Victor and signaled him to continue. And after Victor sorted out his thoughts, he continued, "A week ago, I suddenly felt that I was constantly weakening, not in strength, but in soul. I thought it was the deity who was seriously injured in hell, so I didn't care much, because a similar situation happened before, but just 3 days ago, I suddenly couldn't sense the deity's condition anymore, as if he was completely disappeared from this world. From that day on, my soul began to die." Hearing this, Richard interrupted and frowned. "If your deity falls, shouldn't you die immediately?" Hearing this, Victor also looked puzzled. "It's true in theory, but I didn't die immediately, so there is only one explanation. The deity is still alive, but he may have been seriously injured, so it's gradually dying. Even with me as a clone, I began to disappear. I have tried every means to stop this, but have failed." After speaking, Victor looked at Richard nervously, and Richard's brows were also wrinkled at the moment, wanting to think about what happened, but unfortunately there was not enough intelligence to support, neither did Richard any answer. But at this moment, a thought suddenly flashed in Richard's mind, and an idea suddenly appeared in his mind. He didn't know if this method would work, but it was the only method he could think of at the moment. After just thinking for a while, Richard quickly had an answer in his mind. "Anyway, there is no other way now. It is better to use a dead horse as a living horse doctor. If it doesn't work, it can only say that Victor's life is bad." Thoughts filled his mind, but Richard's tone was full of confidence. "Don't worry, I will help you with this matter, there will be no problem." As soon as these words came out, the originally nervous expression on Victor's face instantly calmed down, and there was even a hint of joy on his face. "Thank you, Your Excellency." As he spoke, Victor bowed and saluted, and Richard accepted it calmly, without showing any signs of insecurity. After so many years of training, Richard has already understood one point. As a superior, other people can panic, but you can't panic. Because the superior is the backbone of a team. If even the backbone himself panics, the hearts of the team will be dissipated. Once the hearts are scattered, the team will naturally be difficult to lead. So even if it is pretending, Richard has to pretend to be full of confidence. After accepting Victor's thanks, Richard didn't delay, and directly rushed to Dr. Octopus, who was standing by the side, and instructed, "Inject him with a large dose of sedative." After speaking, he said to Victor, "You go to sleep for a while, I want to find out the reason behind this incident." As for Richard's words, the two naturally would not go against it. Although they were a little confused, they nodded at the same time. The two of them left Richard's office together and headed for the laboratory downstairs. And just after the two left, black shadows appeared in front of Richard instantly, and the giant shadow and the claw shadow instantly occupied the entire office. Looking at them, Richard opened his mouth and instructed, "Block this floor. No one will come up without my order. If anyone dares to break in, kill them directly." Listening to Richard's order, the people of the Shadow Corp's eyes flickered, and they merged into the ground again. And the shadows one after another filled the entire 22nd floor. Richard's method is very simple, that is, to directly ask Victor's deity, Dr. Destruction, what happened, and then think about the solution. And how to find Dr. Doom, Richard is also prepared. One of the abilities of the sheep talisman he possesses is to enter a dream, which can invade the dreams of others. And Victor and Dr. Doom are one body. Richard wants to try. Can Dr. Doom be found in Victor's dream? If found, Victor will be saved. If not found, Victor will have to wait to die. To enter other people's dreams, Richard's soul must leave the body. During this period of time, Richard's body was an empty shell, so Richard ordered people to block the 22nd floor. As for why not let Dr. Octopus protect himself, to put it bluntly, Richard doesn't trust anyone. If Richard hadn't mastered the mind and body of the Sombre Corps, Richard wouldn't even believe the Sombre Corps. The only person in this world that he can trust is himself. Without dawdling, just after the Black Shadow Corps blocked the 22nd floor, Richard's soul immediately left his body. Glancing at the body leaning on the office chair, Richard's soul body turned around, and the ground he passed directly came to the 21st floor. This is where Dr. Octopus' laboratory is located, so when Richard crossed the ground, he immediately saw Dr. Octopus and Victor below. At this moment, Victor was lying in the nutrition cabin, and Dr. Octopus injected him with a lot of sedatives, so in a blink of an eye, Victor fell into a deep sleep. Seeing this scene, Richard's eyes flashed, and his body moved directly to Victor, and instantly got into Victor's mind. It is estimated that few people know what a person's dream looks like, but now Richard can see it with his own eyes. Victor's dream was pitch black, there was no light or even any direction. It is as if nothing before the birth of the universe, empty. But not long after Richard appeared here, the darkness of nothingness gradually began to change, scenes were formed naturally, and the dream world gradually gained light and characters. But these people or things are very vague at this moment, and it is impossible to see the specific image at all. Richard could only shake his head. There was nothing he could do about it. After all, this was Victor's dream, and God knew what would be in his mind when he fell asleep. Resisting the disappointment in his heart, Richard quickly scanned the entire dream world, trying to find something different from it. Not to mention, Richard soon noticed a place completely different from the entire dream world. It was a door, a wooden door. Compared to the blur of the dream world, the door seemed very clear. Looking at this door, Richard suddenly had a feeling that he should be able to find Dr. Doom through it. With a trace of exploration, Richard's soul body quickly walked towards the wooden door. When he came to the door, Richard put his hand on the door handle, pulled it gently, and the wooden door opened in response. The whole process turned out to be effortless. And as the door opened, a fiery red world appeared in front of Richard's eyes. This place is surrounded by magma and lava, full of destruction and despair. Here Richard feels a touch of truth, but there is a touch of falsehood in the truth. After hesitating for a moment, Richard lifted his leg and stepped through the wooden door, entering this fiery red world. And just when Richard broke in the very center of this fiery world, the figure suddenly opened his eyes. In the next second, the figure instantly disappeared in place. At the same time, Richard, who had just crossed the wooden door, saw a phantom slowly emerging from the void, and finally condensed and formed. Seeing that the condensed phantom was 80% similar to Victor, Richard's gaze couldn't help condensing, and he instantly understood that this phantom was probably the Dr. Doom he was looking for. And while Richard was watching Dr. Doom was also watching Richard in large numbers. Feeling Richard's extremely powerful soul power, Dr. Doom's face suddenly became dignified, and a staff also appeared in his hand. The whole person looked at Richard with a hint of vigilance. Which king's lord are you? I didn't expect to find this. It seems that I still underestimate you. But if you dare to break into my world, then you underestimate me too much. After that, Dr. Doom waved his staff, and the entire lava world instantly became shaken. And Richard's mouth twitched after seeing this scene. Looking at Dr. Doom, he looked like he was going to fight at any time. Helpless, Richard can only use the power of the dragon charm. Suddenly, a powerful dragon's might and dragon's roar spread from Richard's body, and Richard's aura also changed. Although the appearance didn't seem to change, the majesty of the dragon on his body remained unchanged, but made Dr. Doom stop for a moment. There was a hint of hesitation on Dr. Doom's face, and his tone was uncertain. Holy, Your Excellency. When the words fell, Richard nodded in response. Seeing this, Dr. Doom's face suddenly showed obvious joy. At the same time, the whole person also breathed a sigh of relief at this moment. Although he has only met Richard once, because of the identity created by Richard, Dr. Doom is extremely impressed. Therefore, after Richard showed his momentum, he recognized his identity for the first time. After dissolving the tense atmosphere, Richard quickly brought the topic to the topic, and asked with a hint of doubt in his tone. "Where is this place? How did you become like this? You looked like you were hiding from someone just now." Richard looked at him suspiciously, while a wry smile appeared on Dr. Doom's face. "It's a long story, it's the way it is." After sorting out his thoughts, Dr. Doom told the whole thing, and Richard was shocked after hearing it. For ordinary people, when they mention hell, they think more about the destination of yin spirits, but in fact, this is not the case. The demon in the Marvel world is more equivalent to the alien dimension, where all the demons live, there is no ghost, and there is no reincarnation. And now the entire hell is ruled by 7 demon monarchs, who are named after the 7 original sins in the world, namely arrogance, jealousy, laziness, rage, greed, lust, and gluttony. And just 3 years ago, a treasure was born in the depths of hell, called the Eye of Amonis. This treasure could actually make the devil reincarnate. When the news came out, the whole hell was completely boiling. Although demons are powerful living beings, they are also dead when they die, and there is no such thing as reincarnation and resurrection. Of course, it's not that doesn't have such means, but that such means are expensive and complicated, and are simply not available to ordinary demons. Therefore, the appearance of the Eye of Amonis made all the demons go crazy. No one wants to master such a treasure, especially for the 7 monarchs. If they have such a treasure, it is equivalent to owning a group of undead demons, which can greatly enhance their power. Maybe even take this opportunity to unify hell. Suddenly, a disaster was triggered. The 7 demon monarchs, all of whom wanted this treasure, did not give in to each other. In the end, in order to compete for the treasure, the 7 demon monarchs fought even more. In that battle, the demons shivered under the power of the 7 kings. However, the final result was beyond everyone's expectations. The Eye of Amonis did not fall into the hands of any monarch. Instead, it was completely shattered under their devastating power, and it was divided into 2 parts. 7 of the fragments fell into the hands of 7 demon kings, and the 8th fragment fell into the hands of Dr. Doom, who was in hell. For this matter, Dr. Doom did not participate from the beginning to the end, but the people who did the disaster at home came from the sky, and the next thing can be imagined. For the Eye of Amonis, the 7 kings could not give up, but they were afraid of each other's powerful strength, so the 7 demon kings set their sights on the 8th fragment at the same time, wanting to get the 8th fragment first. Say something else. Suddenly, the disaster of Dr. Doom began. As a talent who has been systematically rated as a 2-star, Dr. Doom's strength is absolutely terrifying, but no matter how powerful he is, it is impossible to compete with the demons in the whole hell. And under the orders of the 7 kings, the demons in the whole hell took action, and there were even a lot of demon lords. The strength of these demons is no worse than that of Dr. Doom, and in the end, Dr. Doom could only flee in a hurry. It's not that he didn't think about handing over the fragments. If he could, he would like to get rid of this trouble as soon as possible. However, after the fragment fell into him, it merged into his soul. To take out the fragment, he had to break his soul first. And this has completely become an irreconcilable contradiction between Dr. Doom and hell, or he dies, and then the devil takes out the fragments. Or, he can only fight against the demons in hell and try to survive. There is no doubt that Dr. Doom naturally chose the second path. And as a result, Dr. Doom was caught up in a years-long escape. In the end, not long ago, Dr. Doom, who had just gotten rid of the pursuers, had no time to breathe a sigh of relief, and a crack suddenly opened in the sky of hell. A big hand descended from the sky, with the aura of destroying the sky and destroying the earth. Dr. Destruction was frightened to the core. Because he recognized the identity of the raider through his breath, the 7 monarchs of hell, the arrogant devil. The power of this existence has far exceeded the cognition of Dr. Doom. Therefore, in these years of escape, Dr. Doom has fled to the edge far away from the 7 monarchs. And he also used magic to cover up all his information and try to hide his traces, so he didn't inspire 7 monarchs to do it themselves. But now, because it took too long to get rid of the chasing soldiers just now, the arrogant Demon King locked his position and shot directly from the air. For a time, Dr. Destruction was completely desperate, and the terrifying aura emanating from the giant palm that fell from the sky was so desperate that people couldn't have the slightest idea of resistance at all. In the end, without any suspense, Dr. Doom's body was directly smashed to pieces on the spot, and his soul was severely injured, and he almost lost his soul on the spot. Fortunately, at the most critical moment, the fragments of the Eye of Amonis that were integrated into his soul protected the origin of his soul and gave him a chance to breathe. In the end, Dr. Doom seized this opportunity, used the power of forbidden magic, ripped apart the space, and came to the center of hell. This is a Jedi, covered with lava and flames. Even the demons in hell cannot survive here for a long time. Instead, it has become the best refuge for Dr. Doom. However, due to the heavy damage suffered before, although Dr. Doom escaped and ascended to heaven, his soul is also withering, and this is why Victor's soul began to weaken. As the main body, when Dr. Doom dissipates, Victor's soul will naturally dissipate with it. After listening to Dr. Doom's remarks, Richard also took a deep breath. At this moment, the cold voice of the system suddenly sounded in Richard's mind. Ding! Detected the reincarnation of the devil, the shard of the Eye of Amonis. Reminder, gather the Eyes of Amonos, you can consume the number of lottery draws, and sign the master-servant contract. After speaking, the sound of the system quickly disappeared without a trace, but Richard's eyes instantly became bright, and the bright was a little scary. To be reincarnated as a servant of the 8 great demons is a very tempting choice. Even if Richard's temperament is calm, his heartbeat will inevitably accelerate after hearing the news. But this feeling only existed for a while, and Richard quickly restrained all thoughts. This matter sounds tempting, but except for the fragments of Dr. Doom, the remaining 7 fragments are currently in the hands of the 7 kings of hell. With Richard's current strength, he wanted to fight with them, and he was still short of fire, so Richard decisively pressed this idea into his heart for the time being. He shook his head at the moment and said to Dr. Destruction, "You can't stay here any longer, leave hell with me, otherwise there will be only a dead end." Hearing this, Dr. Doom nodded in agreement, but then he looked confused. Right now, my soul source is declining, and I have no power to leave hell, and I need a fleshly body to nourish my soul, otherwise the source of my soul will remain forever. Decline. Hearing this, Richard suddenly fell into serious thinking, and soon an idea emerged in his mind. Isn't the shard of the Eye of Amonis integrated into your soul? You can try to integrate yourself into it. If it is feasible, I can leave here with the Eye of Amonis, and then you can too, left together. Richard's words made Dr. Doom's eyes light up, and he nodded immediately, without speaking, and directly operated. Soon, a dim light slowly radiated from the head of Dr. Destruction, and then the figure of Dr. Destruction was like a wisp of blue smoke, constantly blending into it. In the blink of an eye, Dr. Doom disappeared, leaving only a piece like a meteorite, slowly floating in front of Richard. Apparently this is the shard of the Eye of Amonis. Seeing this scene, Richard was sure, raised his hand and grabbed the fragments in his hand. The fragments are only the size of a fist, so it doesn't take much effort. After doing all this, Richard began to go back the same way. When he passed through that portal, Richard felt a little apprehension in his heart. He didn't know if he could take the fragments away. But things turned out to be good in the end. Richard passed through the portal with the fragments as he wished, and reappeared in Victor's dream. Using Victor's dream as a springboard, he crossed the barrier between hell and the world and returned to the world. And just after Richard left with the fragments, in the depths of the 36 layers of hell, the 7 monarchs raised their heads one after another and looked at the dark red sky. Someone took the 8th shard. A voice full of arrogance sounded slowly. That's the stuff of hell, it must stay in hell. This voice was full of laziness. I'm going to tear the barrier and come to the world. I must bring things back. The words with the meaning of rage sounded. But in the end, it was rejected by that arrogant tone. You can't go, it's not time to tear up the agreement, let Mephisto go, he is very familiar with the situation in the world. Agree, comma. This order waited for the agreement of the remaining monarchs, and the rage could only reluctantly give up his own ideas. On the other side, in the laboratory, after Richard emerged from Victor's dream, Dr. Octopus was still standing beside the nutrition cabin. Richard, on the other hand, did not stop, and returned directly to his own body. The figure who was sitting on the office chair opened his eyes instantly, and Richard's hand suddenly had a fragmented meteorite. Seeing this scene, Richard's eyes flashed. He stood up directly from the office chair, lifted his legs out of the office, and walked towards the laboratory below. At the same time, Richard also waved back the shadow core in his heart, so he didn't need to continue to be vigilant. Taking the elevator to the 21st floor, Dr. Octopus quickly greeted him. "Boss, Victor has fallen asleep, what should I do next?" Since Richard hasn't been in hell for long, Dr. Octopus is unaware that Richard has settled the matter. At the moment, Richard waved at Dr. Octopus and said, "You can just watch from the side." After speaking, he went straight to Victor's nutrition cabin, looked at the fragments in his hand, and used the power of his soul to transmit a voice. "Diaresis, we have left hell, and there is your avatar in front of you. Go in by yourself." After finishing speaking, the fragments in Richard's hand suddenly glowed, and then the residual soul of Dr. Destruction turned into bits and pieces, instantly penetrated the nutrition capsule, and merged into Victor's body. This time, Dr. Doom completely disintegrated and merged his soul source, which caused the fragments of Amonis to remain in Richard's hands. Upon seeing this, Richard was not polite. He put it away with his backhand and put it in the system's inventory. This is also a tacit deal between Richard and Dr. Doom. Richard helped him escape Ascension, while Dr. Doom left behind fragments. Both parties get what they want, and finally achieve a win-win situation. Whether it is Dr. Doom or Richard, they are very satisfied with this result. Without making Richard and the others wait too long, Victor, who was lying in the nutrition cabin, the King's, suddenly opened his eyes. Seeing the cold and arrogant color flashing across his eyes, Richard sighed suddenly, and Victor was finally fused by Dr. Doom. Compared to the main body of Dr. Doom, Victor is still a lot weaker. Richard didn't say a word about this. After all, he fused himself, and Richard didn't know what the difference was between the two bows. Anyway, as long as he continues to serve himself, whether Victor or Dr. Doom is just a hell under his own hands. As Dr. Doom woke up, the spreader didn't stay in the laboratory any longer. After saying hello, he turned around and left the laboratory. It also did not go back to the top floor, but left the headquarters of the Dark Alliance and headed towards home. In the laboratory of a military base, a routine experiment was being carried out at this time, and not far from the laboratory, in a military building, General Ross was listening to the report of his subordinates. Since the defeat against Jin that year, General Ross's status has not only dropped significantly, but he has also lost a lot of power in his hands. Although he still holds the rank of Lieutenant General, he has lost most of the power in his hands. This is the price he has to pay for that fiasco. However, the decline of power in his hands did not change General Ross's iron-blooded character. On the contrary, his character became more extreme than before. The iron-blooded and toughness of a soldier was best implemented in him. Just when General Ross was listening to the report of his subordinates, suddenly, a violent explosion came from outside the military building. The sound of the explosion was so violent that even the building standing at the foot of General Ross trembled slightly. Suddenly, General Ross stood up from his seat, turned to look at a building with black smoke outside the window, and said coldly without looking back, "What happened?" Listening to General Ross's question, Hathaway, who was on the side, quickly dialed the phone and asked about the situation. After getting the answer, he hung up the phone and answered quickly. "General, there was an accidental explosion in the test, and a large number of researchers died. All experimental data was destroyed in the explosion, and only the head of the laboratory, Bruce Banner, survived. Now Dr. Bruce has been taken to the hospital, and the people below have begun to clean up." Listening to Hathaway's words, General Ross's face suddenly became extremely ugly, with a hint of gloom. Don't look at General Ross's majesty now, but his life is not easy, and the small actions against him have never stopped. In addition, the power in his hands has decreased, and the number of people who have fallen into trouble has also increased. Now that the experiment in charge of him has exploded again, how could this series of things make him feel better? On the other side, a military vehicle quickly took Bruce Banner to the hospital, where Bruce was eventually treated at New York City Central Hospital. After receiving the notice from the military, the New York Central Hospital was facing a formidable enemy one by one, and made preparations for emergency rescue. But when the person was delivered, after a series of inspections, they suddenly found that the person in front of them was healthier than they thought, and there was no sign of injury. If Bruce hadn't been in a coma, they would have thought they'd been tricked. For 3 consecutive days, Bruce had been in a coma, and the doctors in the hospital had been busy for so long and could not find out the reason for Banner's coma, so everyone gave up for a while. At noon on the 4th day, Bruce, who had been in a coma, finally woke up, but before everyone was happy, everyone saw that Bruce's body suddenly began to rise rapidly and the whole person gradually turned green. In the blink of an eye, Bruce, who was still a little thin just now, completely turned into a giant like a hill, and there were screams one after another in the hospital. Bruce, who became a giant, obviously lost the ability to think, and only the tyrannical instinct remained in his eyes. Roar! A terrifying roar suddenly came out of his mouth. At this moment, his mind was full of thoughts of destruction. With a sudden wave of his hands, a big hole was knocked out of the wall of the ward, and the Hulk ran out of the hospital. I don't know how much panic it caused along the way. Just after the accident in the hospital, General Ross also quickly received the news and obtained the surveillance video of the hospital. Looking at the surveillance video, Bruce Banner, after transforming into the Hulk, showed the powerful destructive power. General Ross's eyes instantly glowed. At the same time, he immediately ordered, "CGCH, I must catch him back no matter what, I need this power from him." When the words fell, Hathaway on the side nodded immediately, and the next orders were quickly passed from his hand. And a large number of soldiers also began to quickly gather to this New York City. General Ross's response speed was fast, but the Hulk's action speed was not slow. The hospital he was in was already in the city center, so after rushing out of the hospital, the Hulk came to the bustling area of New York City. Huge stature, terrifying destructive power, coupled with the fact that the Hulk has only the instinct of destruction left, so a disaster suddenly swept the entire New York City. The Hulk is like a bulldozer. Wherever it goes, everything shatters, and the pedestrians on the street are like ants on the ground compared to the Hulk. There is no need to deliberately target them, and many people die in the green. In the hands of giants. In just 10 minutes, with the Hulk at the center, the buildings within a radius of 1 kilometer have suffered devastating damage. As for the number of casualties, there are countless people. This is Marvel, the paradise of superheroes, the common people's paradise. Hell. You never know in which accident you will die. 10 minutes later, the raging Hulk's movement was restricted. A large number of soldiers had blocked the surroundings of the Hulk. Helicopters were hovering above the sky, and Tiger tanks had begun to aim at the Hulk. Seeing these little ants appearing around, the Hulk became more and more angry and manic. With a roar, the sound wave instantly shook all directions. All the soldiers on the scene looked embarrassed when they heard this roar, and many people felt a burst of pain because of it. Commanding General Ross from the rear, watching this scene, a stern look flashed in his eyes, and his tone was cold. "Attack. Let him taste the power." After receiving the order, the frontline troops, who were already ready, immediately launched an attack. Boom, boom, bang. A loud bang suddenly reverberated in New York City, and a terrifying explosion occurred directly in the city. The tiger-shaped tanks fired in unison, the smoke filled the battlefield, and the shells fell directly on the Hulk. The helicopter in the sky fired rockets one by one at this moment, which instantly exploded on the surface of the Hulk's body. As for the soldiers around, at this moment, they were frantically emptying the bullets in their firearms, and instantly constructed a terrifying metal storm on the spot, which fell on the Hulk continuously. Suffering such a strong attack, the Hulk's painful roar continued to spread all over the place, and finally accompanied by a violent explosion, the Hulk's figure fell backwards and hit the ground heavily. For a while the ground trembled, and the soldiers who witnessed this scene burst into cheers. However, the cheers of the crowd did not last long. Just when everyone thought that the monster in front of them had been defeated, as the gunfire stopped, the smoke gradually dissipated, and the Hulk, who fell to the ground, climbed again on the spot. "Stand up." At this moment, the expression on his face became more and more angry, and the terrifying aura on his body became more and more powerful. Looking at the weak ants around him, the color of destruction in the eyes of the Hulk was even more intense. Therefore, under the terrified eyes of everyone, a devastating blow came. A tiger tank, like a toy, instantly rose from the ground in the hands of the Hulk, was used as a weapon, and smashed down at everyone. Boom, With a loud noise and an explosion, under everyone's terrified eyes, a team of 100 people was directly smashed by the Hulk, and dozens of people were smashed into meat sauce on the spot. Such a terrifying and death scene made everyone tremble with fear, and the on-site commander quickly shouted, "Attack! Attack! Attack!" The sound of gunfire that had just stopped sounded again. However, this time, everyone clearly saw that the weapon that could have caused a trace of damage to the monster in front of him was completely useless with the monster's rage at this moment. The cannonball hit him, and a violent fire broke out, but in the next second, the Hulk came out of it unscathed and marched towards the crowd step by step. In the face of this unbreakable opponent, many soldiers present collapsed. Some people threw down their weapons and turned to run away, and such emotions instantly affected the people around them, which soon formed a great rout. No matter how the commander shouted, many soldiers on the scene no longer had the courage to fight the Hulk. In the end, a modern mechanized force was beaten by the Hulk to collapse, and eventually turned into a rout. After that, the Hulk chased after him, causing countless lives to die for a while. This disaster lasted for hours, and finally ended with the disappearance of the Hulk. Military building, office. At this moment General Ross is holding the phone to his ear, and a violent roar is ringing from the phone. "Fake, fool, what did you do? You know how many people died today. You think you haven't had enough trouble, right, fool?" Listening to the rebuke from the boss on the phone, General Ross endured it silently, without saying a word. After waiting until the voice on the phone was tired of scolding, General Ross said respectfully, "Minister, I need support." When the words fell, Defense Minister Rex Thad fell silent on the phone. And General Ross didn't rush, just waited quietly, until after a while, Rex's words slowly remembered, "I support you, but I hope you can give me a good result, otherwise you will retire early." After that, Rex hung up the phone, and General Ross looked out the window with cold eyes. Although the appearance of the Hulk brought a huge disaster, it also allowed the Stars and Stripes Federation to see the powerful power of the Hulk. How can it be possible to say that it is not mindful? Especially General Ross. After experiencing a series of incidents, he urgently needed one thing to stabilize his position, so he asked for support. Fortunately, the final result was good. He got the support of Rex as he wished. Although he bet his future for the rest of his life, as long as he can successfully capture Bruce Banner and gain his power, all those problems will no longer be problems. The military began to move, looking for traces of Bruce, and wanted to arrest him. On the other hand, Richard also noticed this incident. In fact, this incident was causing a stir in the entire Star-Striped Federation, and it would be difficult for Richard not to know. Just after the Hulk disappeared, Richard got a report from Daniel, but because he was in class at the time, Richard did not give any instructions until the end of the day's class. Sitting in the car going home, Richard brought it up again. "Go get a Hulk fight video, I'll get it later." Hearing this, Daniel, who was sitting in the driver's seat, nodded and quickly sent a message on his mobile phone. And Richard leaned on the back seat and pondered after giving an order. The Hulk is definitely the biggest comparison in Marvel. Richard didn't expect him to appear at this time, and he felt a bit of a headache for a while. Katakana middle. 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 At the moment, Tony's matter has not been resolved, and Bruce Banner jumped out again, which caught Richard by surprise. In fact, Richard has never figured out what to do with Bruce Banner. Although he is very powerful, and his experience is easy to blacken him, this guy is completely a ticking time bomb, and he is not affected by it at all. Control. An uncontrolled time bomb, no matter how powerful, Richard didn't want. But the problem is, if Bruce is not blackened, it means that Richard must kill Bruce, otherwise the two sides are very likely to become hostile in the future. But Richard didn't want to face a comparison like Bruce, so Richard's heart was rarely full of entanglements. Half an hour later, the vehicle driven by Daniel stopped at the door of the house on time. As Daniel got out of the car and opened the rear door, Richard also got out of the car. On the side of the road, a strong man in a suit had been waiting here for a long time. After watching the two get out of the car, he quickly trotted over, nodded respectfully to the two, and handed a USB flash drive. Daniel took the USB flash drive over, waved the man away, and then presented the USB flash drive to Richard. "Mr. Richard, everything you want is in there." He took it over, and the spread nodded, and then walked directly to the door of the house, while Daniel sent Richard away before driving away. "Use the key to open the door and walk into the house." The house is deserted. Vanessa has gone on a trip during this time, and Jin Bing has been staying in the Emperor's building because of a lot of business recently. He rarely goes home, so the whole family has only Richard alone. He got himself a glass of milk and a sandwich for dinner. Richard brought a laptop, plugged it into the USB flash drive, and played the contents of the USB flash drive. Although the news about the Hulk has been blocked by the military, due to the suddenness of the incident, the blockade is not perfect, so Richard obtained all the video materials, including the entire process from the appearance to the disappearance of the Hulk. There is a lot of content in the USB flash drive, which is often enough for several hours. Richard browsed it carefully, and finally stopped the video at the time when the Hulk stood up after being knocked down for the first time. Looking at the repeated pictures on the laptop, Richard Masuo lowered his chin, and a thought flashed in his eyes. This Hulk is still the Hulk in Richard's memory, and his strength increases with emotional changes. From the first time he was knocked down by a cannonball, to when he stood up, the whole process took less than a minute, but the strength and physical defense of his body have been increased by a third of the original. And in the follow-up battle process, it is still improving. This is not good news for Richard. Therefore, Richard had to give up the idea of killing the Hulk, otherwise Richard was really afraid that his men would besiege half of 287, and suddenly the Hulk exploded, which would be embarrassing. And if he doesn't kill the Hulk and doesn't want to go against the Hulk, then Richard has only one last option left, turning the Hulk into his own. However, not now, but after he can control his strength. Otherwise, the absorption of the current Hulk would be a total disaster, and Richard didn't want to wipe his blood all day long. Of course, since he decided to absorb it, Richard couldn't do nothing, at least now he can brush his favorability and lay the foundation for the future. After clarifying his thoughts, Richard quickly settled his dinner, and finally left the house and headed for a residential area in Manton. Richard didn't know much about Bruce Banner, but he knew one thing, that this guy was a lover. So, if in the entire New York City, where is the most likely to find him, it is only by his girlfriend Betty Ross. Speaking of which, the two of them can be considered a bad relationship. Betty's father is General Ross, and General Ross is desperately trying to catch Bruce. As a result, the relationship between the three is as if the pig shoved the cabbage, and the cabbage growers chased and beat him desperately. It is a typical fancy family ethics drama. For Richard, the reason why he knew Betty's residence was naturally because Richard had already investigated it. In fact, not only Betty, Richard seemed to have done nothing in the past 7 years, but he recorded one familiar name after another in his mind, and asked people to investigate their information, plan ahead. Except for some people with special status, such as Tony and Bruce, who did not investigate much information, Richard has a lot of information on people with insufficient social status. The figure slowly floated down from the sky, and Richard finally landed on the roof of the residential area. The house at his feet was Betty's residence. Of course, Richard had no interest in stealing jade and incense, so he didn't enter the house, but just stood on the roof and waited patiently. As time passed, the night was cold outside, and Richard was like a statue, almost petrified standing on the roof. Until the time came to 12 midnight, when everything was in darkness and silence, a sneaky figure quietly appeared outside Betty's residence. The moment he appeared, Richard, who was standing on the roof, instantly sensed his existence. Suddenly, Richard looked down condescendingly. Looking at the embarrassed figure, a smile quietly appeared on the corner of his mouth. Bruce Banner, it's in pain right now, he doesn't know what happened to him, and he doesn't know why he became like this, and when he wakes up, he finds himself killing a lot of people. Although his consciousness was in a state of confusion at the time, it didn't mean that he didn't have any memory in his mind. In fact, what he did after incarnating as the Hulk was imprinted in his mind, so after returning to his human form, he realized what he had done, and he turned around and fled immediately. In the city, hiding in dark corners all day, he panicked like a rat in the sewer. Extremely disturbed, he needed a warm haven, so Betty suddenly appeared in his mind. But he knew that the military outside must have been looking for him now, so he did not leave the hiding place immediately, but waited until the night fell and everything was silent before quietly leaving the hiding place and came to Betty's house outside. Looking at the familiar house in front of him, a flash of excitement flashed in Bruce's eyes. At this moment, he was like a wanderer who was about to return home. The inside of his heart was cheering, and it was not enough for outsiders. But just as he was about to step into the house, his footsteps suddenly stopped. He looked at his embarrassed appearance, and thought of what he had done to become a monster during the day. Brewston fell into low self-esteem. The footsteps that were about to go out were taken back by him, and he was stunned in place. Just when he was in a daze, he did not notice that a figure had quietly appeared behind him. Richard looked at the silly Bruce, shook his head helplessly, and had to take the initiative to say, "Friend, I think you need help." As Richard spoke, Bruce, who had been in a tense state, jumped away instantly like a frightened rabbit. After turning around, Richard, who was a little excited, said quickly, "I didn't mean it, I really didn't mean it, I couldn't control myself at the time, you have to believe me." Seeing his appearance, Richard instantly reacted that Bruce was treating himself as a person chasing him, and Richard was about to explain his identity. But before Richard could speak, with the change of his emotions, a faint green appeared on Bruce's body at this moment. This scene suddenly made Richard's eyes twitch, and his mood instantly turned bad. Although he knew that Bruce was easily out of control now, he didn't expect to have reached this point. Just emotionally out of control had already made him have a tendency to transform. At the moment Richard had to speak quickly to comfort. "Hey, man, relax, don't get excited, I'm not here to catch you, I'm here to help you, as long as you're not excited, we can talk about anything, so relax, don't get excited," Richard said in a soft tone, even with a hint of spiritual guidance, which finally changed Bruce's situation significantly. At least the faint green on his body was silent again at this moment, and this also made Richard a long breath of relief. Under the guidance of Richard's words, Bruce gradually calmed down. But there was still a hint of doubt in his eyes, and he hesitated at the moment. "You really didn't come to arrest me? Can you really help me?" There was a hint of caution in Bruce's tone, and even a hint of desire. Now, he has just mutated into the Hulk, not the Hulk who has been hunted down for years in the future. So now he is confused, uneasy, like a person who is in a desperate situation and desperately needs a life-saving straw. Even if he grabs this life-saving straw, it may bring serious consequences, so now he can't care so much. Richard, who has always been good at penetrating people's hearts, immediately felt the desire in his heart. He nodded with a smile and said, "Trust me, I will help you, but before that, you must learn to control your own emotions, because when you get excited, you will release the monster in your body, you understand yet?" Listening to Richard's explanation, Bruce nodded vigorously, took a few breaths of air, and calmed himself down quickly. Seeing his appearance, Richard nodded with satisfaction, then waved his hand and said, "You come with me now, we must first study how the cells in your body mutate. You are also a scientist yourself. You should understand that without research, we will have no way to eliminate it, so I need your cooperation, okay?" For Richard's words, Bruce is naturally meaningless, not even vigilant, letting Richard say whatever he says. This made Richard's heart full of sighs. Sure enough, except for a few people, most of the superheroes were novices at the beginning, and it was also the best time for them to fool. In order to prevent Bruce's emotional agitation, Richard showed all his gentleness, and even his tone of speech became very soft, completely different from the previous style. In this regard, Richard himself felt helpless. It is true that Bruce can't stand the stimulation at all. After leaving the residential area with Bruce, Richard dialed Daniel's phone, and 10 minutes later, Daniel drove to Richard's front. As the car stopped, Daniel got out of the car and opened the rear door for Richard, but Richard didn't get in the first time, but made a please gesture to Bruce. Bruce hesitated for a moment, nodded cautiously, and got into the back seat of the car. Daniel, who was watching this scene, suddenly had a hint of doubt in his eyes. However, he did not appear to ask, just quietly doing his own thing. As Bruce got into the car, Lisa also sat in the back seat, and Daniel closed the door and entered the driver's seat. When Daniel got into the car, Richard's voice came from behind. Go to the old laboratory in the Bronx, and notify Dr. Octopus and Dr. Doom to come over together. Richard instructed one by one, and Daniel wrote it down silently, then took out his mobile phone and sent 3 text messages. After doing all this, he started the car and headed for the Bronx. Although the research team in the Bronx district has been moved to the headquarters of the Dark Alliance by Richard, the various scientific research equipment has not been moved. It was because of the need to replace new research equipment, so these old equipment were abandoned by Richard. If it wasn't for taking Bruce to study the condition of his body today, Richard might never have remembered this laboratory in his life. As for why Bruce was not taken to the laboratory of the Dark Alliance, it was naturally because of his uncontrollability. Richard didn't want the Dark Alliance headquarters to be suddenly destroyed by the angry Green Fat, although the probability of such a thing seems to be very low now. After all, Bruce's mood is very calm now. But that doesn't mean he's 100% sure, and Richard never likes to gamble on luck. Unless he has to, he prefers to take matters into his own hands. Half an hour later, the vehicle stopped under the building of the old laboratory on time. At this time, the Jungdong building had become brightly lit. Of the 3 messages Daniel sent just now, 2 of them were to inform Dr. Octopus and Dr. Destruction, and the third one was to inform the people below to clean up the lab. So when Richard and the 2 arrived, everything was ready, which shows Daniel's care. And that's why he can stay by Richard's side all the time. Stepping into the door of the building, Richard took Bruce directly to the Research Institute on the 5th floor. This is the original laboratory of Dr. Octopus, and the scientific research equipment in it is also the most sophisticated in the entire building. As Richard and Bruce set foot on the 5th floor, Dr. Octopus and Dr. Doom were already there. Looking at the 2 of them, Richard nodded to them as a greeting, then turned his eyes and introduced Bruce. This is Dr. Octopus, this is Dr. Destruction. They are the best scientists. They believe they can solve the problems in your body. Now they want to check you and control your emotions. I don't want to be caught here, destroyed. Richard exhorted seriously, looking a little serious, and Bruce took a deep breath and nodded heavily. Don't worry, I understand. I will definitely control myself. After speaking, Dr. Octopus stepped forward and opened various inspections with Bruce. Richard came to Dr. Doom and asked in a low voice, "How do you feel?" Hearing this, Dr. Destruction was silent for a while, and then slowly said, "His body contains infinite potential, but his soul is weak, so he cannot control the huge potential in his body. And if you want to deal with him, you only need to take out his soul. At that time, the body without the soul is like a car without power, and it no longer poses any threat." Dr. Doom spoke in a flat tone, as if he was telling a trivial matter, showing the qualities of a magician. And Richard, after listening to these words, his eyes suddenly lit up, as if a door was pushed open in his mind, and his thoughts became clear in an instant. Before, he had been looking for a way to physically defeat the Hulk, subconsciously ignoring the soul aspect. Now, after being reminded by Dr. Doom, I suddenly remembered that a person's strength is not only limited to the body, but also the soul. And with the way to deal with the Hulk, the plan in Richard's mind has also changed. According to the original plan, Richard did not intend to absorb Bruce into the Dark Alliance now. But if you can control him well, that's another story. Thinking of this, Richard immediately turned his attention to Dr. Doom, and when Dr. Doom looked at this scene, his mind changed. He immediately understood Richard's intention, and a smile appeared on his face. As long as he joins, leave the rest to me, and I'll teach him how to control his power. Seeing that Dr. Doom took the initiative to agree, Richard nodded and temporarily skipped this topic. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.